My name is Lena Dostilio, and I am the director of the Center for Community Engaged Teaching and Research. And for the past 3 years, we have been able to offer faculty fellowships who have proposed projects that substantially expand our notions of community engaged teaching and research, and that further the work of a faculty person and that of his or her community partners. This fellowship, named the Gaultier Fellowship, was given to Dr. Norman Conti for the 2013-2014 year. Norman Conti is an associate professor at Duquesne University. He has published ethnographies of recruitment, socialization, masculinity, and ethics training in policing, as well as 2 analyses of the social networks that develop within cohorts. These articles have appeared in Policing and Society, Journal of Contemporary Ethnography, Police Practice and Research, and Social Networks. He has also co-authored an article on destigmatization for the Prison Journal. Additionally, he has co-authored book chapters on social crime prevention, sustained dialogue, and hate crime. Currently, he is examining the emergence of trust and the role of humor in police academy training. His specialties include social psychology, social networks, and police socialization. For his fellowship, Dr. Conti proposed the development of a think tank to occur in the State Correctional Institute of Pittsburgh with men serving life sentences. Specifically, the think tank would bring together police trainees, life-sentenced men, and a variety of academic and community-based individuals, including students, to discuss criminal justice policy. As is the case with true community-engaged work, Norm's project is dependent upon trust between people of significantly different experiences and perspectives. Its timeline has been influenced by the politics of appointments within the Department of Corrections and the Police Department. The project treads in the world of racial, economic, and power disparities, asking people to make visible their histories, their redemption, and their vulnerability. As you can imagine, this takes tremendous time, commitment, and authenticity on Norm's part as well as those within the think tank. This symposium comes at the end of Norm's fellowship, and this represents a culmination of effort to bring the Elsinore Benue think tank into reality. You ought to have 3 handouts: today's program, as well as an explanation of the Elsinore Benue think tank, and also a letter from one of its members, Malachi. I do encourage you to glance at those as the afternoon moves on. So, these efforts have brought Norm to today, as well as a myriad of colleagues. Norm and his Inside Out colleagues presented a panel at yesterday's Association of Clinical and Applied Sociology on think tanks and the sociological imagination. He spent much of today with a diverse network of colleagues to write a manual on think tank development, and that group will continue their writing retreat through Tuesday. And I am pleased to say that I was present at this morning's SCI Pittsburgh's think tank when Norm announced to the Inside Guys that he will indeed be meeting with Pittsburgh's newly appointed police chief in 2 weeks to discuss the inclusion of police academy trainees in dialogues with the think tank members. Truly, this was a movement of a mountain. So please help me recognize his efforts. The efforts of the Elsinore Benue think tank and those of Dr. Norm Conti bring us to today. And so with that, I introduce Dr. Norm Conti.
Thank you so much. I'm going to tell you a little story, and then I'm going to get out of the way because we have some really cool people here today. It was 2011, and I was the first semester of the year. I was getting ready to take a number of freshmen into the Allegheny County Jail for an Inside Out class. There was a change in administration in the Allegheny County, and we were all of a sudden unable to go into the jail. So I had to find somewhere else to take us. So I said, what about SCI Pittsburgh? Talked to the people there, got us in. The first day I walk in, I looked down at the table where the men had put their IDs. They carry IDs around the prison. And I saw an ID for Robert Wideman. Now, I went to school in the early 90s at Pitt, and back then all anyone talked about was John Edgar Wideman, the book Brothers and Keepers. There were always posters. It was, for a young man, it was a very exciting thing. When I walked into that think tank when I walked into that class with a group of freshmen, having switched from being the freshman myself to now being the professor, seeing Robert Wideman in that class, I walked up to Robert Wideman, who we call Farouk in the think tank, and I said in my best tough guy voice, because it was prison, "You related to that writer?" He said, "Yeah, it's my brother." And I screamed like a 14-year-old girl inside. And I said, "All right." After that, we were eventually able to offer 3 Inside Out courses at SCI Pittsburgh. We eventually formed a think tank made up of 7 of the men from those classes, most of whom are doing life sentences. We're focused. Our real goal is to first write a manual for how to replicate think tanks. Our second goal is to use the Inside Out model for trained police. Let me introduce our first panel. This part of the program is called Duquesne University Inside Out. We have Tyrone Wirtz. Tyrone Wirtz, 7 years ago, was part of my training in Inside Out. When I met Tyrone, he was serving a life sentence in Gradeford Prison. And I had no expectation that this guy would ever get out. I would go back at night, I would think about him and the other men from the group. I'd see their faces as I was falling asleep, and this moved me and this changed me. This week, Tyrone was in my house with my kids. It was one of the best times I've had in that house. We have Melissa Krabby all the way from Oregon. Melissa is one of the founders and leaders of this movement. She's come. Lori Pompa was supposed to be here, but she got sick. Lori Pompa is sort of our leader in this quest. Next to Melissa, we have Katie, formerly Pantaleo, she was our student here in the Policy Center. She's now Katie Eli, and she's now about to get tenure at Lock Haven, right? She came here for her master's degree. She went to IUP and got a PhD in criminology, and now she's at Lock Haven doing very well. Finally, we have Kyle Aquendo. Kyle was in the very first Inside Out class I ever taught. Kyle was incarcerated at SCI Crescent. When Kyle got out of prison, he contacted me. And he said, "Norm, I want everything we talked about in Inside Out, everything we talked about trying to do more and do better and do good and help the community, I want to do that now that I'm out." So we've remained in contact, and the first thing we've been able to do is be here. I'm going to turn this over. Oh, we also have Darlene Weaver, who's going to, at the end of this, is going to explain how what we're doing is in the spirit of the mission and identity of Duquesne University. And we have Lena Distilio, who really, none of this would have worked well or even at all, perhaps, without her help. Lena is the spiritual guide to those of us who want to get out in the community and do things. The guys in the think tank with me call her the Shiro. And they don't come any better. Lena.
So Norm asked me to moderate the beginning panel. And so I'm going to actually look to our colleagues, Melissa and Tyrone, to help us understand a bit of the history of Inside Out and to give us a context before we delve into Inside Out in Duquesne. If you don't mind making sure to use the mic, that would be super helpful because, of course, this is being videotaped and we want to make sure we've got your sound. So again, the history of Inside Out and sort of some of its legacy as you see that.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to thank you so much for welcoming me to this event. I'm so happy and proud to participate in this very powerful event that's going to really enlighten everyone exactly what Inside Out is and what it does. As Norm said, my name is Tyrone Wirtz. I served close to 37 years in Gradeford Prison. I was sentenced to life without parole. And in that context, I was doing a lot of different work inside of the prison. And this woman, this extraordinary woman named Lori Pompa, who I had known about 15, 20 years prior to the start of Inside Out, came to me with the idea that she had for running Inside Out classes where students came in for a whole semester to sit side by side with an equal number of guys inside. Now, there's a lot to this story. I just gonna give you a little background context. She used to work at the Pennsylvania Prison Society, an organization that's 200 years old, that was an advocacy organization, provide services for guys in prison and those coming home. Eventually, she became a professor at Temple University, and she taught a class on corrections. And in teaching her students, she said to herself, "Hold it, how did I learn about corrections? How did I learn about prisons?" And she said that she learned by going inside a prison. So she began to take her students every semester she had class. She would take them into prisons in the area to go on a tour, to meet with guys inside, meet with staff, to have these conversations, to give them a real-world experience about what the criminal justice system was all about. And out of one of these discussions, one of the guys, the conversation had ended up being very, very powerful in a transformational way. And one of the guys said to her, it would be so powerful if we could do these classes, these kind of talks over a semester. So he generated this idea in her mind and began to germinate. And in 1997, actually that was in 1995 that happened. In 1997, she began to do the Inside Out program in the county prisons in Philadelphia. And at the time, she just saw it as a class opportunity for students to learn and for the guys inside to have an educational experience. Well, in 2002, she came to Grady for another one of her tours, and after the conversation, she came to me and said, Tyrone, I'm doing this program down at the county's prison where we bring students in for the whole semester. And I thought that was not only interesting, but radical in some respects, right? But I also thought it was great because if you understood my background, when I came into prison, I had dropped out of school early for a number of reasons. The list is too long for me to go through it right now. But and so by the time I got to Grady for prison, I was reading at second grade level, my math skills in second grade, my comprehension skills in third grade, and a guy introduced me to education. He put me in adult education class. He said, look, although your test scores are low, your IQ is above average, and you could do academic work. Well, I never thought that I could, but he put me in this class. I got my GED. I went to Villanova. I graduated with a bachelor's degree. And so when Lori brings this idea to me about this educational experience side by side with students, I jumped at the chance because the thing that I knew intimately was that there were thousands of guys, not only in Pennsylvania, but across this country, who were like me, who were smart but didn't know it, who could do academic work but didn't know it, who didn't value education because they was never taught to value education. And I thought what they needed was an educational experience. So I jumped at the chance to bring the course inside of Grady Prison. Although at the time I thought it was kind of radical to bring undergraduates into a maximum security prison. And I never thought that the administration would go for it, but they did. They thought it was an idea worth pursuing. The program was approved, and we got the program approved. So now I'm a graduate of Villanova University. I never anticipated participating in this class. I saw the class as for beginners, right? And Lori said to me, no, Tyrone, you got to take this class. I said, Lori, I'm a Villanova graduate, proudly, you know. This is a little beginners class. I don't want to take the class. This is for guys I want to give education speech. He said, oh, no, Tyrone, this course is a different kind of pedagogy. It's more than just about education. So I acquiesced and I took the class, and I have to tell you that it was such a powerful experience to me. Like I said, I was a graduate of Villanova. I was president of the Life Organization. I was creating programs. I was doing some really valuable work inside the institution in the community. But when I took this course, man, it put me at a very different level because it kind of opened me up to some things I really wasn't aware of. And just the way the class is taught, when we talk about professors, this is a facilitated class where the professor takes a back seat and let the students engage in conversation. We had all kinds of conversations about why do people commit crimes, what are prisons for, victimization, those kind of things. It really opened our eyes. And what I found most compelling about this course was it's not like most college courses where you have to have a GED, high school diploma, you know, or even have the necessities to be able to do college level work. It was volunteer. You joined the class, and because we wanted to give people an educational experience, and a lot of guys that took that first class with us, and there was a bunch of guys that had never, ever did anything positive, never did anything educationally, but they had this class, and it was very transformational for them. And they left that class and began to sign up for GEDs, and some who already had high school diplomas went on and registered for the college programs. But more importantly, when the class ended, no one wanted to end because we asked for approval to run for 16 weeks. And we just saw it as a class. We do it this time, maybe we do it next semester. But it had such a tremendous impact on both the inside and outside students that nobody wanted to quit. So we went back to the administration. They allowed us to meet every Wednesday night. And when we began to meet on Wednesday night, we call ourselves the think tank. And Lori always says because we thought well together. And our goal at that particular time was to do public education around prison reform and those kind of things. And the students continued to come up every Wednesday night. And then someone came with the brilliant idea that says, this is too good to just keep here at Temple. We need to make it a national program. And from there, from starting in 2003, we began to train instructors. That's where Norm got trained. And now we are an international program. College professors, instructors from all over the country, and in some respect from various countries around the world, come to Philadelphia or Oregon and Michigan to get trained in the inside-out method. And they take it back to their universities, their states, their countries, and begin to run classes. So what the most powerful piece of this is that think about it, every semester there are thousands of students going to correctional facilities all around the world doing inside-out classes. So that is my basic history of how Inside Out got started, what it means to the individual who takes the class of not only does it affect in a powerful way the inside student, but the outside students are transformed by the experience. A lot of them change their majors, a lot of them want to get civically engaged, and it's just been such a powerful force. And we don't like to call it just a program, it is actually a movement. As we go forward, as we pull more people in, and we see it as a model for really changing the world. Thank you very much.
Melissa?
So Tyrone did a great job of talking about Inside Out's history, and I'm just going to say a little bit about Inside Out's framework and why I think it works. So I see, if I was going to put Inside Out in a nutshell, it would be building community across difference in order to create an engine for social change. And so I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by that. When I was about 16 or so, my brother was sexually assaulted. He later became an addict, developed a relatively trivial criminal history, and because we come from a white middle class family, he's now a very good earner, very stable, et cetera, et cetera. But nonetheless, that experience devastated our family. And as victims, and with my brother particularly as a victim, we very much didn't get what we needed. Several years later, I began visiting a man on death row in San Quentin. So this man, whose name is Calvin, had also been sexually assaulted as a child. He'd also been subject to physical abuse as a child, addicted parents, and but Calvin didn't come from a white middle class family, and Calvin didn't get the support he needed, and Calvin killed someone and wound up on death row. And so here I am with looking at these two examples and seeing how everyone was failed and how everyone was wronged, and wanting so much to make a change in it, but feeling really alone and not knowing how to go about that. So I went to graduate school for public policy, and we'd have these exercises where you're supposed to figure out how to make a policy recommendation, and I would always start with talk to the people that the policy is intended to affect and go from there. And that was the wrong answer. That wasn't even supposed to be on the list of what you did. You were supposed to sort of refer to previous memos and academic work and come up with a recommendation, but actually talking to people and being in community with people was not part of that, which was disheartening for me. So I went on and did a few different things, including working for the Pennsylvania Prison Society, which is a great organization, but it's still like being a hamster on a wheel. Like you're trying to deal with a problem you want to confront, but you're actually not making any change. So when I was friends with Lori at the time she started Inside Out, and what we realized right around 2002 when she started talking about replicating is that, wow, this is not a social service model. This isn't a, work with one person and try to help them fix their problems model. This is actually a social change model. And the reason it is because the people in those classes build community. And in this society, so often we feel so alone within our own communities, never mind reaching out to people who are different from us. And in an inside-out classroom, in an inside-out think tank, people are getting to know each other in a profound, beautiful way across all kinds of different forms of difference: age, race, class, gender, sexual identity, you name it. And that is very powerful, because I think that, you know, when the power that's unleashed when a stereotype is shattered, to me, is like the power that's unleashed when an atom is shattered. It's very, very empowering. And what you want to do immediately after that is create change, but not the change that's made standing up against something, opposing something. It's the kind of change you want to make by pulling with people and working with people together. And so I am going to stop there. If there's time later on, I can say more about specific ways that's manifested, but I think that's the key thing. It's building community, really creating classroom communities and think tank communities where there is a lot of love, and I don't use that word lightly or sentimentally, where there's a lot of love, and that love helps create the engine for change.
Thank you, Melissa. So now let's turn to Katie and to Kyle, who are Inside Out alumni. I'm very interested. We've heard now Tyrone and Melissa talk about transformation and movement and social change. So you both signed up for or were asked to be a part of a class. Did you read it as social change, transformation, and movement right off the bat? And if not, how did you get there? How did you find out what it was really all about?
Well, the way that I got involved, I mean, since I was a graduate student here between 2006 and 2008, and I was Norm's graduate assistant, and I remember that he had called me, I think shortly after going through the training, and had asked, you know, well, do you think that the Duquesne students will do this? And I said, sure, you know, it sounds like a great opportunity. And, you know, whenever he got the class set up at Crescent, which of course from Duquesne, you know, our class started at 6 p.m., and I mean, we were leaving Pittsburgh right around rush hour, so it took us quite a bit of time to get to Crescent. So it was probably, you know, in taking all of the Duquesne students, we carpooled from here. I mean, it was probably about, you know, an hour and a half. You know, I think one class we got there after 6 o'clock, so it did take us, you know, quite a bit of time. And one of the things, because I was really interested in it when Norm had told me about it, and I really wish I had brought with me, because the first week that we had the inside class, we had to write a reflection paper, and I still have that, and it's back in my filing cabinet at home. I wish I would have brought it. Because I've kept that as a reminder of kind of the transformative nature of just even that first class. Because, you know, with the long drive, you know, from here to Crescent and then, you know, back, you know, I remember that driving out there, you know, the ladies I was in the car with, you know, we were talking, you know, just having discussion about various things. The drive home, it was almost completely silent. So it was really interesting, because that entire drive back, you know, the hour and a half, you know, we were all just kind of thinking to ourselves, you know, how, you know, just processing what had happened. And, you know, it was a very powerful experience. And, you know, throughout the semester, I think it just, you know, continued to build. And one of the things, because actually, you know, now that I live in Lock Haven, I actually drive past Crescent on my way to get here. So that was kind of interesting to, you know, on my drive, you know, to reflect about that. And there was something that I remembered, and I don't know if Kyle remembers this, but it was probably, I don't know what week in the semester it was, but we were having a discussion about police. And I don't know if you recall that conversation, but it was a very interesting, because, you know, we were divided into groups, you know, inside and outside students, and there was a very different perspective about law enforcement from the outside students and a different perspective from the inside students. And so, you know, it was a really kind of difficult conversation to have, because, you know, you have, you know, these outside college students who have a different perspective about law enforcement and, you know, how they're helpful. And then you have these inside students who, you know, maybe have had some issues with law enforcement. And so there was, you know, it was a really powerful conversation, because I think by the end, you know, all of us were kind of thinking that, you know, all of the outside students began to see things from the inside perspective. And the inside students began, I think, to see, you know, some of the different perspectives that we came to class with. So.
Great. Kyle?
As for me, first I want to just thank Norm, Katie, and the rest of the class that ain't here, but just for taking their time out and actually taking those long road trips out there. You know, they didn't have to do that. That was something voluntarily they did, and I'm a living proof of, you know, what they did to impact my life. How it came about, I just received a phone call to go down to the education building. I didn't sign up for this. It was something that they felt like I fit, and I said I'd give it a try, and I gave it a try, and we got to the group, and it was something. It was more than what I thought it was going to be. And then realizing what we were studying and what we were talking about and what the conversations we were engaging became hot topics and back and forth, because like she said, you know, you have college students coming from a whole different background to us inside students that have issues with the system. And you know, that's what fired the conversations up rather than just having college students asking the same questions to each other. But realizing them giving me awareness of the flip side of what the system is, the corruption, and the awareness of if I didn't change my act, I was going to be part of that revolving door. And they helped me realize what that revolving door is to change my life and be here now today.
Thank
Talk
you.
about my experience.
Can you tell us a little bit more, either Katie or Kyle, about what an Inside Out class actually looks like, how it behaves? What's the format that it takes?
From my experience with the program, Norm's wonderful with how he puts the things and the layouts. You know, he gets them to interact with the prisoners and the outside students. You know, not just partner up with just one person and you're just partner up the whole entire group. No, he might break them up to groups of four, groups of two, and always spreading them out so that they can actually learn from each other, get different perspectives from different individuals. You know, constantly, you know, if there was a situation, how can we resolve it? That's what majority of the situations that would come up was, all right, we're having a problem with this issue, what could we do to resolve it? Was our outcome all the time. So, you know, we always got somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And Katie, how was the class structured in terms of what was the subject of the class, and what were the assignments like? How was that distributed across the students?
Well, the class from Duquesne was the criminal justice policy class, I believe, and I think what we had done as kind of our final project, what we had worked on towards the end of the semester was something related to fixing up Pittsburgh neighborhoods. And I know I have the copy of the whole thing at home too, and I didn't bring it. But you know, the majority of the classes beforehand were just talking about issues with the criminal justice system. You know, we had discussions about, you know, law enforcement, about courts, about corrections, and then, you know, the last few weeks were, you know, we were in small groups and we all had a section of this larger kind of project to think about. And one of the interesting things was that, you know, even though, you know, Kyle and all these other individuals who were in Crescent, you know, not anywhere near Pittsburgh, you know, were very interested in how what they could do could actually help things in Pittsburgh. And, you know, I think that our final product turned out pretty well. And, you know, it was interesting over, you know, the course of those few weeks that we met to pull together these different components about how we could institute change in Pittsburgh neighborhoods.
Hmm. Yeah, Tyrone.
One of the interesting things, the way the class is actually structured, is we sit in circles, right? And it's inside student, outside student, inside student, you know, all around the circle. And like I said, the instructor is really a facilitator. And, you know, I don't want to say what I said last night, but, you know, normally, like when you're in a college class, you know, you're sitting facing this way, the professors, lecturers, you take your notes, and you normally every time you talk right back to the professor. Well, in an inside-out college class, you sit in a circle, and the instructors always make a point of, don't talk to me, talk to the class, so the students actually talk to one another, and it grows down. And I think the subtitle of the Inside Out Prison Exchange program is breaking down the walls that separate us, right? Because you had two diverse groups coming in with their own misconceptions and myths about college students and what college students have about guys inside. And so when you have these kind of circles where you talk to each other, a lot of that begin to break down and break away, and you just become people learning together. And like I said, I mean, it was, like I said, I graduated from Villanova. I'm happy, I'm very proud to be a Villanova graduate, but my experience was boring as hell. I want to tell you that. And Inside Out, it was exciting. We had these really deep, profound conversations that really took me to another level. And like I said, it revealed some things about myself that I really wasn't aware about, some prejudices and biases I had, and I thought I was perfect. But so that's how it's structured. And there's a syllabus. One of the reasons I didn't want to take the class is, you know, I looked at the syllabus and you had to write 8 papers, and who the hell want to write 8 papers, right? So it's very rigorous. It's not like you just sit there and talk. You had to write 8 papers, and it was like 6 stacks of books. And I'm saying, like, I'm done with college, you know. So it's very rigorous, but it's challenging, but it's very enlightening, and it's very educational, and it's transformational to one. That's why when Lori asked me to take the course, I'm looking at it just as an education course. She said, no, it's more than an education course. It's about learning from the inside out, you know. So that's actually how the class is structured.
Sure. And I'll just add one other piece. Another key value is equality of voice. So what Tyrone said about the circle is symbolic of community as we're creating our own learning community, and each voice within that community is equally listened to. And so when people, for example, break into small groups, I mean, imagine doing this with people who are very different from you and having a conversation about a wide open question like, what is a prison for? Or why do people commit crime? Or what is crime? You're going to get a million different perspectives. And I look back on my college classes as wasted opportunities because I never learned a thing from my fellow students. I only learned from my professor. And in this one, you learn how smart everybody else in the room is and really how amazing every individual is. And so that equality of voice is key. And the point about our training instructors, that's really how we've grown. And my key role was in largely developing the instructor training. And we put instructors through that same experience, ideally in a way with a group of incarcerated alumni, a think tank, part of a think tank. And those incarcerated guys are those instructors' coaches. They're some of the facilitators of the training. They're in a leadership position relative to the instructors. And it still surprises me that someone would want to teach this class who had a lot of stereotypes about people who are incarcerated. But nonetheless, like if they go through that process and they realize, oh my God, these people are teaching us, it's very transformational for the professors.
So, Katie and Kyle, I want to come back to you for just a minute. Katie, I'd like to hear, when you were a graduate student and involved in the class, how did it change your understanding of who you were as a graduate student, right? What was going to be expected of you as this intellectual in training, as we say?
Well, that's a good question. And actually, whenever I was here at Duquesne, I was planning to go get my PhD, and I was so much impacted by going through the Inside Out class as a student that 2 years after that I did go to the instructor training. And I think that, you know, it was really interesting because at that point I think I was the first student who took the class who then went to the instructor training. And so when I was at Graterford meeting with the think tank, they were just in awe of the fact that, you know, that I was so impacted as a student that I wanted to go be an instructor. And, you know, even though, you know, I went through the training, I have yet to teach my own class. It is on my agenda to be able to do that at some point. But, you know, that experience was very transformational in terms of, you know, because my PhD is in criminology, and I'm currently teaching criminal justice. But, you know, just in how to approach, like, language in the classroom, like to not use, you know, and I do this with, you know, my intro class, to not, you know, say, you know, criminals, or just to find different ways in terms of language being important. But also, you know, it's interesting just the way the class was set up using the circle. I use that in a lot of just my regular classes, you know, at the university, because that is something that, you know, I brought back in terms of pedagogy from as an Inside Out student, but then also as going through the instructor training, that there is a lot of power in students learning from each other. And, so, and I do currently, a lot of work with the local jail in Clinton County, and I'm hoping to eventually, do something with Inside Out, either there or one of the other facilities. But it has been something that really did kind of change my view of the criminal justice system. And I do remember kind of after, going through Norm's class and then saying I wanted to go through the training. And, my parents were very concerned about my safety going into a correctional facility. And, especially, once I had switched majors and became a sociology major, then, social and public policy, and then, going to get my PhD in criminology. So they knew I wanted to teach, which is where my passion is. But I have always been interested in corrections. And so it took a very long time. And I actually remember coming back from my training, and I think I was talking to Norm about it, because no one really understood about the impact of the training and the impact of the class. And I was trying to go tell all these people like how great it was and how wonderful it was. And, I have, while I've been at Lock Haven, I mean, no one in my department knew about it. And, I talk to them about it all the time. So they do know it's on, my agenda to have that available to the Lock Haven students. So, I mean, it was a very impactful experience that really kind of changed the way I view about the criminal justice system.
And Kyle, you and I've talked a little bit in the last 24 hours, and on occasion you used the word empowering, that it was an empowering experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. It was an experience, because when they first told me about how it was going to happen, you're going to have college students coming in, but college students that was in the criminal justice system, learning the system. Right away, I thought, all these guys are coming in here to judge us, or these guys are coming in here to study us, to find out what we do and why we do it. And it was nothing like that. It was more like, students. They made us feel as much of a student as they were. And it was like being in class, learning about what we changed, what we were there for. It was about, you're in prison, I'm better than you. It was none of that. It was just strictly about business and about, them learning what they didn't know, them learning the reality of what they're learning in the classrooms, them seeing it for themselves. And, it was, I can remember one time talking to Joanna, was one of the students in the class, and she said, oh, what are you going to do tonight? And I said, I'm going back. I'm going to go back to the cell. I'm going to make something to eat real quick, and I'm going to sit back and watch the basketball game. She said, basketball game? She said, you got TVs in your cell? And I said, yeah. She wasn't even aware that we had TVs in her cell. So, little things like that got them to understand, that prison, it's a place where, you make a mistake, but it is also a place where you can better yourself too. And you can choose. It's just like being out in society, in communities. You can choose to do bad, you can choose to do good. Same thing in prison.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask Darlene Weaver if she could talk a little bit about our local context. So as you know, we are Duquesne University, and we are a Spiritan institution. And Darlene is the director for the Center for Catholic Intellectual Thought. And I'd like to just yield the floor to her for just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and take questions from the audience.
Oh, sure, thanks. And I want to thank Norm for inviting me to be part of this. It's really a privilege to hear from the other panelists. Duquesne University is a Catholic university. It's sponsored by the Spiritans. The Spiritans operate in approximately 60 countries all over the world today. They founded a number of schools over their history, but Duquesne is the only Spiritan university in the Northern Hemisphere. And actually, mostly it's been the only Spiritan university in the world. There's now a Spiritan university located in Ghana. So that's why we have to say we're the only one in the Northern Hemisphere. Like any religious congregation, the Spiritans are drawn together by a particular charism. A charism refers to the ethos, the kind of animating spirit that attracts people to that congregation versus another one, right? The men and the women, because there are lay people as well in the Spiritans, are Spiritans, not Jesuits or Dominicans or something like that, because there's something about that particular community that appeals to them. And so I would say that there are three kind of hallmarks or features of the Spiritan charism. The first is that the Spiritans, otherwise known as the Congregation of the Holy Spirit, are open to the Spirit. Right? right? This is really central to who they are. That means that they're a community who try to cultivate a posture of openness, attentiveness, humility. Why is that important? It's because these are folks who are willing and ready to chuck all the plans that they had, all the ideas that they had about how things ought to be going, and to be led by the Spirit into a new territory, a new experience that they could not have predicted. So even listening to the panelists speak, you can see that reflected in the inside-out experience. The faculty member who decides to teach an inside-out class, or even before that to undergo the training, the students, the inside students, the outside students who take an inside-out class cannot predict in advance what is going to happen. They embark on a journey together, not knowing what it's going to reveal or disclose to them, and where they're going to wind up in the end. A second feature of the Spiritan charism is working with or walking with those on the margins. The Spiritans are, as I said, active all over the world, and they engage communities that face challenges like homelessness, hunger. They work with refugee and displaced populations and so on. So again, there's a really nice fit between Duquesne's Catholic and Spiritan identity and the Inside Out program. It's incredibly easy to deny the dignity of incarcerated populations, even among those who want to insist that all human beings have this intrinsic dignity. When you're dealing with a community where you say these folks have been duly convicted of doing horrible things, somehow it's easy to pretend then that you're therefore better than them, and that the particular rights we would say are correlated with human dignity can legitimately be set aside for this particular population. So the fact that we've got a program like Inside Out here at Duquesne, at a university where there are folks, the Spiritans have been committed to going where no one else wants to go and doing the kind of work that no one else wants to do, is particularly apt. And then the third feature of the Spiritan charism that I would point out is that the Spiritans are committed to developing authentic relationships with others. It can be incredibly tempting for an educational institution to regard marginalized communities in an opportunistic or instrumental way, right? So it's, and Kyle was just speaking to this, right, in terms of his worry that folks would be sort of looking at the community as yet another opportunity to further a research agenda, right, to collect some data, or to provide an experience for their students in a way that's very instrumentalizing of the inside students. But that's not what an authentic relationship is built upon, right? And so everything that you're hearing about the Inside Out program intimates that the incarcerated populations are approached in a way that respects their dignity, that affirms their equality as persons, that respects their experience as a source of insight, as an opportunity from which the outside members can learn, and that challenges the kind of traditional structures of a scholar expert from the university on the one hand, who somehow goes into a situation like this with these expertise and these gifts to bestow, like we can fix or save, and instead takes a very, very different posture of, as a co-learner, right? And so I think the program as a whole, and that these three aspects of the Spiritan charism that I've just identified are really readily reflected in one another. And I could say more, but it's much more interesting to hear from the folks that have been brought together. So, yeah.
Thanks, Darlene. Norm, could I ask you to take that microphone? At this point, we'll take some questions from the audience for our panelists.
Go ahead. Oh, take it around. I'm sorry.
Take it off. Take it. Wait, stop.
You know, follow instructions very good.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out this evening and sharing your stories. So obviously the students who participate in the program do accrue credits, or they're accredited towards like a major or so on, right? What do the persons on the inside get? You mentioned that some people become so inspired that they later on go on to pursue either GED courses or college courses. Does that, the Inside Out class, does credits from that class transfer to any transcript that you might later want to work on, or is it just like an enrichment project?
So ideally, the Insight students also get credit. There are a lot of structural barriers to that. And so our philosophy is the important thing is the dialogue and the contact. So get your course going, do whatever you can do. If you can get credit from the very beginning, great. And if you can't make that happen, make that strategizing towards that part of your long-term goal. But don't wait until everything is perfect to get the class started. And there are some downsides to having credit. So one downside to having credit is that sometimes then people who don't have a GED get screened out of the class, and Tyrone will speak to that. So there are advantages and disadvantages to credit, but we would aspire for everyone to get credit. Where I live in Oregon, people who take Inside Out classes from University of Oregon and Oregon State University either get a very reduced cost credit on a transcript, or else they get a transcript that doesn't give them credit per se, but says that they were part of the course. So there's over 100 schools participating, so many of them do it in many different ways.
Yeah, I think Melissa said it best, that for me as a guy inside, understanding the value of education, and a lot of guys not having GEDs or high school diplomas or never intending to do college level work, I'm more interested in that people have this experience, because as we said, it's more than just about education. I mean, it's good to get 3 credits, but I think the experience of having a class and learning some things, not only educationally, but about yourself, I think that's more valuable than getting 3 credits. And like Melissa said, there are some places around the country where guys are getting credit, but if we did say that everybody would get credit, then that would eliminate a whole swath of guys who don't have GEDs or high school diplomas, or don't have an intention to matriculate. So I think that the value of the Inside Out is the class and the experience, because it's transformational, and at the same time you're learning something very valuable in terms of education.
Great, thanks. Other questions?
Okay. Kyle said you didn't even sign up for the program. You just got a call to go to the education building and show up for class, right? I'm not sure if anybody else on the panel can speak to, what's the selection criteria for persons on the inside to be included in the class? And why reach out to someone who didn't show interest? What is it about this person that you feel like they would benefit from the course?
Mm-hmm. So that's an institutional issue too, and it depends on the prison. So in most situations, there's just a sign-up sheet posted on the cell block. If a lot of people sign up, then the instructor interviews each one and chooses the class based on that. I think in the case of Kyle's class, my understanding is this is typical for a pilot class, is that the students are hand-selected and asked if they want to participate. In some places, the only people who can participate are people in substance abuse treatment programs. So we have a model, we have a paradigm, and what we say to our instructors is, you work with the people at your prison locally and do what you need to do to get it in there. If they're not willing to do it on the general block, but will only do it in the therapeutic community, do it there. If they're not willing for there to be credit, don't let that be a barrier. Get in. Just the point is, we've got to build relationships across the walls.
Yeah, that was a question for me yesterday that I asked, because I didn't really know how I got picked up. But the deputy of my prison was here yesterday, and we got to ask him, how did I get picked up? And I was actually first class of Inside Out being started. Norm just got out of his training, and Crescent was the first place he was going. So what they wanted to do was they was looking for people's IQs and people that did graduate high school and did get their GEDs to try to get this program going for the first time. After that, they became with the sign-up sheets and they got people in there. Now, if you want to, going into looking at credits, like Tyrone said, you start looking at, you want credits, they're going to start looking at high school diplomas, they're going to start looking at GEDs, and those people that need this program aren't going to be able to be in that program because they don't have them. So it's best, just to get the knowledge rather than just worry about the credits,
So we have time for just one more question, and we can still open the floor.
Can I ask Kyle a question?
Yeah, absolutely, Melissa.
So, we've talked a lot about how alumni go on and create social change through Inside Out. Because it's an education program, most often that's by going back to school, et cetera, et cetera. But not everybody can do that, and we really encourage people to make change wherever they are. And I was talking to Kyle earlier today, and I just wanted him to say a little bit about his path.
All right. Back in '06, I got sentenced to 5 to 10 years. First mistake I made with the system, first time going to prison, and the judge just told me, hey, look, you don't look like you're a bad guy, but you did some crime. I have no choice to send you upstate. And I just made it the best. I made a mistake. I had to pay the price. So what I did was I went upstate and made the best of it. One of the things I went to do is started to further in my education with barbering. I went and started getting I already knew how to cut, so I went to further my barber's license. I couldn't get in right away, so they put me on a list to get in. So 8 months I was just stuck doing anything until I met Norm, and next thing you know, I'm in college courses. So after the barbershop, I had to start getting ready to go out. So I had to get back to the community, walk on highways and pick up trash and plow with the plow trucks. I learned how to use backhoes and front end loaders and all that just to get back to this community, to go back home, to get it back out of the prison. So when I got out, I went to Allentown, Pennsylvania, and they put me in a halfway house because I was out 4 years. They gave me 5 years sentence minimum, and I got out in 4 years because of my good behavior and what I was doing in prison. So they gave me a year pre-release. And I went to a halfway house in Allentown, and I did a whole year and 1 month. And that year and 1 month, I found a job in 2 weeks after I came out in a warehouse. I worked there for 3 years. And I started realizing that where I was working at, paid the bills, but I was miserable. I wasn't out to do what I wanted to do. All the things I was working on in prison to come out and do, I wasn't doing. I was stuck at work, 12-hour shifts. These people, I went from prison to just work and work and work and work and work. And then I got tired of it, and I said, you know what? I got to find something better than this. And I just quit. I got bills to pay and everything, and I just quit. And I said, I can do something better than this. And what I used in prison is what I've been using since I quit that job. I ended up getting my barber's license and, furthering that. And now I'm in a barber shop. And, I don't have, I didn't have the time to sit down and actually get financial aid, go in and decide a major I want to take to do what I want to do. But in the barber shop, I realized that I could reach out to community and societies cutting hair, That's the easy part of my job is cutting hair, but reaching out to them kids and people that are going through them problems out there is the tough part of my job. It didn't need no high school diploma to get my barber's license and stuff, but it didn't need no PhD or any of that, and I'm connecting with kids. Kids are coming to me and telling me stuff that they need to know about that they're not telling their parents, So it's like, I'm living a good cause, it's a good cause, not only just cutting hair, but reaching out to community and in other ways. It's not just having a college degree to reach out to community. We can find other ways to reach out to these young kids to get them aware before they make these mistakes.
Thanks. Well, I think our panelists gave a really great representation of what Inside Out is like, and I want to thank them all one more time. Tyrone, Melissa, Katie, Kyle, Darlene, it's really been a pleasure to have you here with us this afternoon. Thanks.
I want to echo that and say a couple things. Darlene, the best thing about working here at Duquesne is the spirit and mission and identity. It makes us better than Pitt and CMU, despite what people say. Kyle, you are a barber activist. I consider myself a teacher scholar activist. That's one thing. What you do is better, because you show that you can be a barber. You can be whatever you are in a community and be an activist and care about it and make it better. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Katie, the student has surpassed the teacher. Melissa, partner in crime and crime prevention. And my original Inside Out teacher, what's his name, Tyrone? Yeah. It's been wonderful to be with these people, my friends, the people I love. In the spirit and thing, we talk about, authentic relationships with the marginalized and oppressed. Taoists talk about, if you want to be the highest, go among the lowest. Be like water. It's the same idea. I went to Inside Out training. I got to meet this man. I got to know these people. I brought it back to Duquesne, and it changed my life in so many ways. Right? And this has been so wonderful to be with these people. But we shouldn't be happy right now. Aren't you excited in this great? No, and I am in some ways, but every week, the people that go into SCI Pittsburgh with me, we walk in to the prison industrial complex, right? Robert Wideman, Farouk, as we know him, is there right now. When you sit with him every week, as people can tell you, all you can think is, why is this man here? When I met Tyrone, I thought we were getting the training, and the guys on the inside got to pick which group of trainees they wanted to work with, and we had this idea. It was like the racial wheel of fortune we were working on. And Tyrone said, "Yeah, I want to go work with them." I was like, "Oh my God, Tyrone wants to be on my team." It was like being picked first at recess, and I never was. And then, so by going there, I've been so lifted up. But at the same time, we're here for a bad reason, not a good reason. So, when I'm having problems, whether it's professional, whether it's personal, I go into SCI Pittsburgh with a group of 7 men, 6 of whom are doing life sentences. One of whom is halfway through 20 years. And people say, "Oh, you go in and you teach them." I said, "No, they teach me. They teach my students learn more, my Inside Out students, and they'll tell you, will learn more walking in and out of the county jail or SCI Pittsburgh than they learn in my whole other classes. Not just because I don't teach them anything." Right now, my good friend, Robert Wideman, or as we call him, Farouk, is in prison, and he's been there a long time. I'm going to ask his brother, who needs certainly no introduction for me, John Edgar Wideman. I was a freshman at Pitt. It was the picture of you in the leather jacket with the furry collar. Remember that one? I would see that poster, and John Edgar Wideman is coming. John Edgar Wideman is coming. Ladies and gentlemen, John Edgar Wideman is here.
Well, I'm honored to be here, happy to be here, happy to see so many student faces, happy to see everybody's face. It's a privilege for me because these are very difficult times, and I struggle with the split in my own life, in my own family, between being inside and outside. And my family has lived with incarcerated members for over 30 years now. And we still haven't sorted it out, never will. When I wrote Brothers and Keepers 30 years ago, 30, that's more years ago than most of you are old. there were some pretty stunning, to me, statistics about the numbers of people who were in prison, the percentage of those people who were of African American descent, where we ranked in terms of the rest of the world as prison keepers. And all that was quite important to me. And I learned more and more about how deeply entrenched prisons were as a part of American life and a part of American history. And when I say a word like entrenched, that's an abstract word. Put it another way. What's the difference between slavery and prison? Our history is mired in the incarceration of human beings, in the separation of good Americans from bad Americans, white Americans from black Americans, recent immigrants from old Americans. We've not only incarcerated people behind walls and chains, we've also done it in terms of categories. And so all of us are implicated by that. All of us suffer from that condition. And there is no answer. There is only understanding, only awareness, only consciousness. And consciousness is not a weapon, because consciousness of how horrible prisons are doesn't remove them. And consciousness of the horror of my brother's life doesn't change it. But what is the option? If we don't make ourselves aware of the lives of others, then what is the worth of our own life? Awareness, consciousness, that's what you're in school for, to heighten. But it's a gift, consciousness, even if it's a consciousness of pain, even if it's an awareness of pain, it's a gift. When you think about the chances of you, when you think about the chances that that particular collection of cells and nerve endings, et cetera, actually exists and actually does form a picture of the world. When you think of that privilege, when the wind blows in your face, when you hear a sound, when you're alone and you shiver because the world is such a large place. But somehow all those immense forces have allowed you to be aware of it for a moment. And I was talking to my sister this morning, and there are strange moments that all of us endure or we're privileged to, in which there are kind of two voices in our ears. And I'm sure men and women feel this behind bars. And for me, it's a transcendent moment when these two voices are speaking. But this is the moment. One voice is saying, it ain't about you. It ain't all about you. And that's a kind of freeing voice. But it's also a voice which is telling you, you are not so big. You are not so important. And then the other voice that speaks and says, it is about you. It is all of this is about you. The whole shooting match, the wind, the sea, the sound of children laughing, the darkness, time. It is all about you. None of that stuff exists unless you put it together and live a life of consciousness and awareness. So those two voices, one that kind of levels the ego and identifies the ego, It's not about you. And it's scary. But it also is always about you. That's the only thing it can be. The title of the book I wrote 30 years ago was Brothers and Keepers. And I chose that title very carefully. And in a sense, Norm set me up to say, well, Mr. Wideman is going to come and give us a reading and a kind of maybe even a report card about brothers and keepers. Well, in a way, I am going to do that, I hope. But in another way, it just gave me a chance to go back and think about the book. And brothers and keepers, brothers and keepers. It's the and that is the key word. And if I could do it all over again, I'd say brothers and sisters and keepers to get us all in there. It'd be kind of a more awkward title, and it wouldn't have that biblical resonance. But that's what I was trying to say. So forgive me if the sisters are not implicit in the title. You were in my heart. And my mother's a very important character in the book, and the women are important characters. Younger women, older women, they are very important in the book. If you've had a chance to read it, you'll see that. But the and is the important word. Why? I didn't know it at the time. This is like Monday morning quarterbacking. You know, you play a game and you watch a film of it, and then you become an expert on the game and tell people exactly why when there's a tackler coming from this direction and a tackler coming from that direction, you kind of gave a little hip wiggle this way and a little pivot that way, and that's why you got away and ran for the touchdown. But it didn't really happen like that. It was boom, 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 and you got lucky. And they didn't hit you, and so you scored. But Monday morning, after you've seen the film, you can explain exactly what happened. You can explain why it was good to be part of the program inside prison. But, you know, when it comes right down to it, it's still happening. How can you say whether it was good for you or not good for you? Because it's still happening. It's you. It's become part of you. You have internalized it. You are living it. And maybe you're going to do something tomorrow which will be a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it will come out of that program inside out. But you didn't know it today. You can't talk about it. But you are potentially aware and conscious of your ability to move out into that larger world in a sense that you were never had that understanding before. So Monday morning quarterbacking is what we do most of the time, and that's what I'm kind of doing with that Brothers and Keepers title. But I knew what I wanted. What I didn't understand is that with the word and, I was really looking at myself in both sides. I was equally a brother and a keeper. Equally a brother and a keeper. I can't be anything except that. What does it mean to have a human identity? You don't invent that. You learn it. You learn from your parents, you learn from your friends, you learn from your growth, you learn from reading, you learn from art. What does it mean to be a human being? For me, it means and, the linkage, the understanding that you are always both that selfishness and that ego, I, but you're also something else. You are your brother. You are your sister. And you cannot be whole unless you are aware of those two sides. What prison does is relinquish or free us or cheat us of the complexity of an ego that includes always the other. Prison allows us to isolate and separate those parts of ourselves which we don't want to recognize, which we want to deny. The prison functions two make that separation. Absolutely make that separation and make it easy. What's a criminal? Look on the other side of the wall. What's evil? Look on the other side of the wall. Now, in some sense, we all know that. But when I wrote Brothers and Keepers, I knew that I was after a voice to tell my brother's story. And the place where I looked a long time and looked very hard was inside myself. And I had been trained to be a writer. I'd gone to a whole lot of schools and had a whole bunch of classes and read an awful lot of books. And I thought that I could somehow produce from myself that point of view that would make this book a success and make it accessible to other people. But the book never, I wrote a lot of pages, but it never got off the ground until I started to listen to my brother. And not just listen to him, to collect information, as some people said, but really learned to listen to him. And remembered through him my own voice that had not ever been silenced inside me, but that I was probably running away from, probably afraid of. And why? Because I grew up in the streets of Pittsburgh, because I grew up African American, and we didn't speak exactly like everybody else. And what was that vernacular language? Was it something I should be proud of? Was it something that had a history? Was it a voice that had a message for the rest of America, for the rest of the world? I didn't think of it that way. I was trying to, like most of us when we go to school, clean up my act. If you were an Armenian immigrant, you came to America, well, you threw away the Armenian rug because you didn't want people to identify you with the old country. And in a way, that never stopped for immigrants of African American descent. And prison keeps that negativity alive. Prison is a way of telling an old story, an untrue story, over and over and over again. So I had to find in my brother's voice the resources, the tones, the words that would free me, not destroy education, not destroy an Oxford education, not destroy John Milton and William Shakespeare and Virginia Woolf. Not to be in competition with those voices, but to accept them as part of my heritage, accept what my grandmother said, what my aunts said, what my mother said to me, as legitimate ways of looking at the world and learning how they were legitimate. I had to learn that. And the experience of writing Brothers and Keepers was just that, going to school. You're talking about the exchange that happens with the Inside Out program. Well, that was going on for me with the writing of this book. I was an exchange student arriving on the doorstep of my brother, and he was coming from a different world, and there we were just rapping, just talking. And at some point, I was literally freed of the pressure of trying to create, in quotes, a great book or a literary work of art, and just simply grooving and satisfied that my brother and I were speaking in a way we never had. We're 10 years apart. By the time he got to be old enough to be interesting to me, I was gone. I was in other places. So we never had talked in certain ways. And that experience of relearning my language through him and sharing it with him and turning my book into not my creation, but our creation, the book of a brother and keeper, his job as my keeper, my job as his brother, his job as my brother, my job as his keeper. For those to all come together means that even though even though 30 years later, he's still inside prison. And all those statistics that I mentioned to you at the beginning, as I began my research on Brothers and Keepers 30 years ago, have become, in my mind, stunningly, impossibly worse. Stunningly, impossibly worse. And if you want to look up the statistics, you all know about internet. And they are overwhelming. But let me tell you something. I don't like to hear people cite the statistics to me. I don't want to hear about it. Because it's a way of turning those horrific, meaningful facts into a kind of gray noise. And we cite the facts and we go on to the next thing. And the facts don't change. They only get worse. And that gray noise every now and again we hear, but we don't really hear it because it's not meant for us. But anyway, so brothers and keepers. I was, and I'll just be a minute more, I think. I was very excited about coming here because I was in France. I'm a very lucky person. I get to live in another part of the world for part of the year. And that would be something else if somehow young people in America could get some actual visceral day-to-day sense that there is another way to live. There's a whole different reality, a different sense of time, different music, different rhythm, different way people move, different histories, and that they are just as legitimate as the crap you see reproduced endlessly on TV. If American kids could get that sense, maybe we would grow a generation that is more compassionate, that is more outward looking, that is more globally looking. And when I say global, I don't mean how much can be sold, how quickly, and how many places at once. I mean, this little infinitesimal piece of dirt that all of us inhabit. And is shrinking under our feet because we don't know how to inhabit it. Anyway, the international perspective, if more kids could get that, more young people, more old people for all that goes. But anyway, I was happy to come here. Changed my plane tickets and everything, just to get back to Pittsburgh, just to be part of this. And part of my excitement, frankly, was the opportunity to see my brother today. It was supposedly today, in the morning. Members of the conference and inside out people were going to go to Western Penitentiary, where my brother's serving time. As Norm's let you know, he's serving time, whatever that means. But my chance to walk into a room in this kind of situation and actually sit down at a table and talk to him. I see him every time I come to Pittsburgh. But this different kind of closeness, this different sort of approach with company, not just me going to see him, but a little piece of my community as part of my piece of mine, and my brothers and sisters who were going to enter that room. Just the notion of that was so exciting to me. I felt like to go into that alien enemy territory, but I got some partners. I got a community behind me. I have an idea behind me, and even if it's a fledgling idea, even if it's just a few people, you have to take us into account. You just can't dismiss us. It's not a single voice. If we're going to go down, you've got to take 5 of us down, not just one. Just that kind of empowerment was so exciting to me. It was very strong motivation for coming. Lots of other motivations, of course. Subsequently, I found out I couldn't go to the prison. I didn't get to go this morning. And I was sorely disappointed. Why? I've been visiting my brother for over 30 years. I had to show my bona fides. I had to get through whatever research or whatever documentation the prison demands to have anybody become a visitor. So I'm on record 30 years as legitimate visitor to SCIP. Lucky me. And that documentation is in a drawer in the prison. But the reason I couldn't go this morning is because I wasn't documented. Which meant something like, I guess, there's a different group going in this morning, and each one of those people had to be vetted, and there was some worry about that. So, but in substance, if you understand what I'm saying, there were 2 drawers in the prison. And the information was available to somebody sitting at one desk who could open up this drawer and take out this piece of paper, but they didn't do it. And that's why we have to insist on the brothers and sisters and keepers. Because the forces that separate us never sleep. Never sleep, and they are consciously enjoying, if you will, the power that they wield. And I don't say that lightly. They enjoy the power they wield. Part of their identity is they are not that person in prison. There is no "and" that connects. And they enjoy that fact. Consciously or not, they enjoy it. And why do I say that? Because any human being of average intelligence who has a desk with 2 drawers and knows what's in those drawers just half-ass way, in a half-ass way, can open up both if they choose, if it's worth their trouble, if there's some payoff for them. But the fact is, I did get a chance to come, and I'm happy to be here. And I had a nice thing I was going to read to everybody, but somehow or another that didn't seem right. I didn't want to do something prepared and canned, even though what I do is right. And I'm proud of my writing. And I think it would have been a good story for you to hear. It's a story about a guy who's a writing teacher. And he has a student who I'm not going to read the story, but it's kind of interesting, and particularly in the way it connects to Inside Out. The writing teacher is about my age, and he has a student come in with a story that this teacher's smart enough to figure out is a story to help someone. The writer of the story is a young woman, not a woman of color, but her protagonist of her story is a woman of color. And she's writing the story, my fictional student is writing the story to help. That's the point, to help. She wants to help. She admits that her father's a bigot, but her mother's not. The actual person. And anyway, this gets more and more complicated because the teacher, of course, wants to help the student. And the student wants to help this imaginary person. And me writing the story, I want to help everybody. So you might have heard that in another mood at another time, and maybe I'll publish it and it'll be called Writing Teacher. And it's about that very basic exchange that sometimes does occur in spite of ourselves when the desire to help won't be quenched no matter what. And if you go down, you in the midst of this acting out this desire to help, it won't be quenched. James Foley, whose name many of you know, was a student of mine at the University of Massachusetts. And not only that, he was a very good friend. I had a good relationship. I was commuting at that time, and our class ran till, say, 4 o'clock, and I had to catch a train at the end of my class to get back to, or I wanted to catch a train and get back, and he drove me to Springfield, to the station. So I got to know him quite well as being a writing teacher. So I read his fiction, and his fiction was very self-representative and very intimate. So I knew him quite well. Why do I bring him up? Because he's a person, both in the fiction that he wrote and as a writer in general, then as a reporter, as a journalist, he was somebody who wanted to help. What happened to him? Somebody chopped off his head. And that was a horror to me, of course. But I knew at the same time that he was not dead. They could not kill that desire to help. And that's the way I'll always remember him. Why couldn't they kill the desire to help? It's too strong. It is not mortal. It doesn't have a lifespan. It is essentially unquenchable as long as there's one person. As long as there's one person trying to help, the idea of help does not die. And so I thank him for keeping that idea alive or rekindling it for me. But what a price. What a waste. We can do better. We can do things without going to those finding ourselves in those kinds of extremes. So write your stories, take your classes. Remember that it's always a question of connection. That's how we attain our human identity, through connection. And we're brothers and sisters and keepers.
I walked into SCI Pittsburgh this morning. Lena loves one of my catchphrases. It's ashamed and inspired. I walked into that facility feeling very much ashamed today because I had failed to get Mr. Wideman in. I had failed to get my friend Tyrone, my friend Melissa, Kyle, Katie, my friend Sarah, and others into that facility. And I second-guessed myself. Have I gotten too comfortable? Do I just think I have the run of the place? Or they'll let anyone I want in? And I had to go in to sit with those 7 men who I spend my Friday mornings with. I wasn't planning on talking about this. Sit with those 7 men I spend my Friday mornings with every week after they've been preparing for 3 weeks for this event, and tell them we're not coming. It's just me and the usuals. There was a palpable sense of disappointment. Farouk had his good shoes on today. They were extra white. And I was down, and my friends in that prison lifted me up. And we took our hour and a half, and we plotted and we planned. A lot of you have heard me talk about this. We have a model of police training based on Inside Out, some things we want to do, taking police recruits into the prison, getting them to see the men and women in prison as human beings and not as misfits and monsters. I walked into that prison ashamed, feeling terrible about myself and my own failures, and I walked out feeling inspired because those men are facing life sentences and they never give up. They never give up. They always do more, no matter what. When I met Tyrone, there was a man in the prison named Jim. Jim was from the north side of Pittsburgh. And he said, Norm, when I heard you were coming here today, I was so excited. And I said, why? He said, because I'm a juvenile lifer from the north side. And someday I hope to get transferred closer to home and get involved in some activism. At that moment, when I looked at him, I was ashamed and inspired. Ashamed that a man close to my age at the time maybe, who had been incarcerated since he was a child, wanted to get closer to home, to Pittsburgh, and get involved in some activism. From that moment on, there was no excuse for me to ever sit back again. He taught me that. Tyrone taught me that. My friends who are not incarcerated, my friends who are no longer incarcerated, Mr. Wideman, they teach me that. Lena DiStilio made all this possible. Those of you who know me know I can't organize my office. Doug will say that. We talked about not getting in. Jack, I'd like you to stand up, please. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jack Pischke. And 6 years ago, I walked into Allegheny County Jail. He didn't know me from anyone. And I said, Jack, I'm doing this thing called Inside Out. I ran a class at Crescent, but it's just too damn far to keep taking these kids. And Jack said, what do you want to do? You want to bring who in here and do what? How many do you want to bring in? I said, I'd like to bring about 15 to 18. He said, you could bring 6. Since that day, 6 years ago, we have moved hundreds of kids through that jail that met the men. We had a young man who was featured in the Duquesne Alumni magazine, Stephen Bumbless. Stephen was a great philosophy student that semester. And he left the ACJ, he got out, he got released. Geneva College offers a program in social science and urban ministry in Pittsburgh. He became a straight A student in that program because he was inspired, despite his shame of wearing that red uniform in the county jail. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Pischke is the right kind of guy. Could you please give him a round of applause? Let's see. Yeah, I had to write it on my hand because I don't know. That's Lena and Jack. Finally, Remy, I'm coming to you in a minute, so get ready, all right? All right. We really, even if we'd have got in today, we wanted the men to be represented here. I work with 7 men who inspire me every week. They changed my life. I only get stronger every time I'm with them. There's Farouk, there's Fly, there's Craze, there's Khalifa. Give me a minute. I'm sorry. I haven't slept in days working on this symposium. There's Khalifa. There's Sean. There's I got 2 more. What am I forgetting? Oscar, Big O. I almost forgot Big O. Malachi. Oh, it's good. I should forget Malachi because it's going to be all about Malachi in a minute. When I met Tyrone, I said he should have my office. If you had him in the office next to mine, in the right sport coat, not the leather one, in the right sport coat or the right sweater, and you asked any college kid, go find the criminologist, go find the professor, they'd find him, and they'd be right. One of the members of the think tank who fights me the most and is so valuable is named Malachi. Malachi makes me ashamed and inspired every time I see him. Malachi always gives me a pound, and I sometimes say paper. And he'll say, be good, and I'll hit him back and say, be great. Because I don't need to be good, he's great. He wrote something, he writes things, Oscar writes things, Craze writes things, Khalifa keeps us all in line, Fly moderates, Oscar is jealous because he can't bench press as much as me. Malachi wrote something, and Remy, this is Remy, she's one of our students, she comes and meets with the think tank, she's going to come up here and give you Malachi's words, and you will be ashamed and inspired.
This is something Malachi wrote in preparation for the meeting that was supposed to occur this morning. If you guys want to follow along, there's a handout that by the front door. You may have received it. If not, there's copies over there, or I think Dr. DeStilio is handing some out. But he was really looking forward to sharing this, and when he found out this morning that we were unable to bring people in, the first thing he did was asked if we would be able to read this to everyone today. What Elsinore Benno Means to Me by Malachi. A life sentence in the state of Pennsylvania means a social death. This is the punishment that has been legislated by our state. Because we are guilty of taking the life of another, we lost the right to have a social life. But we still live. We breathe and love and hate and have okay days and better days like all other humans. So my questions are, is life without parole enough of a punishment? And should there be a more just sentence? Life without parole seems like a less barbaric sentence than the death penalty. It gives the family and friends of the deceased an opportunity to face the one charged. The state has the opportunity to bring forth its evidence, and the accused has the opportunity to mount a defense. But after the cameras leave, and judges and lawyers prepare for their next cases while the wheels of justice move forward, what has actually been accomplished? The family and friends of the victim have an empty place in their lives that a trial may not fill. And it is like the one found guilty is sent to the moon with limited provisions, leaving the tears of his friends and loved ones in his wake. Now, there is one thing that I want you to consider: the power of human endurance. The victim's loved ones must carve a new meaning of life from what's left behind. Although some don't, many do. They go on and decide not to let the perpetrator win. Many times, physical death causes the emotional death of others, and those that stand strong in defense of their dignity should be commended. But we, the doomed, also endure. There are those of us that accept the call of darkness and inevitably flash and tumble into the jaws of oblivion. When this happens, we lose the few pieces of us that still kept us loosely defined as part of humanity, and we succumb to seek the fitness and of becoming the ultimate human hyenas. But others fight back. The incarcerated men here and others who share our agenda have found a way to use the meager scraps of self-determination we managed to scrape together in this abyss. We secured a way to sew together shreds of dignity, inflated with hints of hope, and use this to float above the depths of the living dead. It is my opinion that only those on both sides of the coin who choose to better themselves despite their situation or condition are in the best position to help others going through similar circumstances. People who suffered victimization and overcame their struggle are the best fit to convince someone grieving to find the inner strength to endure. And also, it is those who have caused pain and suffering in the past and who overcame their struggle are the best equipped to find an answer to reduce the mindset in individuals that says, I am entitled to your possessions, your body, your life more than you. And because I'm stronger or more cunning than you, I deserve it. Back to my questions. Is life without parole enough of a punishment? Should there be a more just sentence? What if it was placed upon the shoulders of the condemned, an encouragement to find a way to retroactively abort what caused the kill? What if we then received the added support and requisite nurturing required to continue to quash any hints of thought embedded in us that made us possible to steal another's life? And once we offered plausible answers and actions in our present environments, shouldn't we be persuaded to share our conclusions with victims' advocates and others, but especially face-to-face encounters with those whose actions are pushing them into the same ultimate condition of an empty destiny? It was wrong of me to take another's life, and in my opinion, I deserve to suffer a social death for my actions. But what if I can stop the same antisocial, venal monster that enticed me to a bad decision from possessing someone else? Shouldn't part of my sentence be to stand in defense against what I've done and act against it ever happening again? The inmates we mentor here have already committed crimes, and our goal is to prevent more damage to the social structure once they leave. But what if people like us served as medics to the lost and dispossessed before another trial, hospital visit, or funeral? Think about it. We can't just continue to follow the status quo and assume that handcuffs cure criminal hearts and continue to let the violent, greedy, and pushy cycle through the steps of their damaged plan. For the Elsinore Bennu think tank, our resurrection comes at a cost, and our role in this think tank is our best attempt at restorative justice. That's what this name means to us. Thank you.
So, you know, we call him Professor Malachi. One of my favorite things about Malachi is when people talk about their crimes or their sentences, Malachi said, oh no, I did mine. I did mine. And now I want to do good. I want to take all the punishment, all the hurt, and all the pain and put it inside of myself and use it to make me stronger and make me better. The men of the Elsinore Bennu think tank, I'll tell you what the name means in case I probably didn't. I'm really into Hamlet, like too into Hamlet. It's not a good thing. And the name of the castle in Hamlet is Elsinore, right? In the Danish, it's spelled more like Helsinore, right? So I love that story because this is the royal family, right? It's as close to heaven as you can get. But they take that castle and they turn it into hell on earth, right? Through misery and miscommunication. If you've certainly seen Stanley Milgram's work, you've certainly seen Phil Zimbardo's The Stanford Prison Study. In the Stanford Prison Study, what Phil Zimbardo was able to do was take the basement of a college building and turn it into a prison. What Inside Out does is take a room in a prison and turn it into a university. For those few hours when we're there, none of us are in prison. We're in a university. So I had the idea that we'll call ourselves the Elsinore Think Tank. That's awesome. It's a great name. Damn, I'm good at titles. If only I could finish the papers. And all the guys said, yeah, that's a good name. I think people like that. Else they won't know what it means, but it'll be a good title. And Malachi said, wait, no. I said, no, come on, Malachi. He said, no. I said, Malachi, come on, what's the problem? And he said, well, you know, when I think of Elsinore and Hamlet, I think of, a castle and there's big scary stuff going on. And I think a lot of white people. And that's not what I see here, I don't see this as a castle. I want to call us the Bennu Think Tank. The Bennu is, he told me the Bennu is an Egyptian predecessor to the Phoenix. They stole the Bennu from us and called it the Phoenix, like they stole everything else. Some people are laughing. And so we went round and round about it and said, Elsinore, Bennu, an inside-out think tank, right? A phoenix rising from the ashes within this castle. That's a prison. That's our think tank. That's what we're about. We're going to shift to a discussion of what think tanks are, what they do, what they can do, how think tanks can move beyond prison. Some places they call them engaged learning communities, not like the learning communities like we have at Duquesne, but where you go and you get different sets of people, you bring them together, and you work on research, and you work on policy, and you try to make a change. Communities of change is another thing they're called. At this point, I'm going to ask, a while back, when all the stuff in Ferguson was happening, that was a story that I actually tried to avoid because I was so depressed after the Trayvon Martin shooting that I couldn't even think about that. But I got a contact from Letty McAllister, hosted Night Talk, And he said, would you like to come on and talk about this? I said, well, I better find out about it first. So I found out about it. I went on the he was kind enough to invite me on the show and have a discussion about this. And Lenny's a guy who's looking at things the right way and trying to make a difference. And that's why I asked him to come here and moderate our discussion on think tanks and what Inside Out could do. And he's going to come up here in a minute and do that. Again, I got to thank Lena. I couldn't organize a bake sale if my life depended on it. Her great assistant Dan, her very beautiful and amazing, and my wife Deanna, her other assistant, mother of my children. She couldn't be here because she's with them. We're still waiting for Tony Gaskew and Jaziri X. So why don't you take a break, grab something over there, and we'll reconvene when they're here. So most of us have had the supreme honor of listening to John Edgar Wideman talk to us today. He'll be continuing on our next panel, Race and Justice, Inside Out, the role of think tanks in generating social change. Over here we have my friend, Tony Gaskew. Tony Gaskew from the University of Pittsburgh, directs the criminal justice program. I met Tony in March, or was it February of last year. Tony was at the Inside Out Steering Committee meeting in Philadelphia, and Tony made me look at all of it differently because I listened to him. Tony might ask you to listen to him. You should listen to him. Tony, I'm not going to tell you Tony's story, but I want you to hear it. I hope he tells you. I hope Lenny can get to Tony's background today. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was in prison with the guys who are now in my think tank. Khalifa, one of the elders of our group, said, Norm, you got to check out this One Hood group, this One Hood organization. I was like, yeah, that's probably another neighborhood group. Like, they got about 100 on the north side neighborhood group. So yeah, I'll get to that sometime. And then he kept Norm, One Hood. I said, yeah, I'll get to that. Norm, Jaziri X. He'd say, all right, Jaziri X. And then I had having coffee with my very good friend and Jacqueline Roebuck-Sackler here. She's a doctoral student, and she makes me feel ashamed and inspired every time I had to sit down and have a conversation with me. She said, the 2 days after Khalifa said, Jaziri X, you gotta find out Jaziri X. Okay. Jacqueline said, there's this guy named Jaziri X. He's who you need to be talking to. So I went on YouTube. I started checking out his stuff. I was ashamed and inspired. I will not be starting a rap career, though I could. So I asked him, and he so graciously agreed to come here and talk about this. I think he's a perfect person to have on this panel because we got 3 generations here of men, 3 generations of men of color from a community that is targeted almost exclusively by the criminal justice system, right? That is the fuel for the machine, that is the grease for the wheels, as my friend Tony says. I couldn't be more excited to have these 3 men here. And our panel will be moderated by Lenny McAllister, who knows how to get it done. Come on, Lenny.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Dr. Conti for having me on. And one of the things that I enjoy about doing what I do, whether it's when I'm on the Pittsburgh Cable News Channel, which is where I'll be running to when we're done with the panel. So I'm going to apologize in advance when you see sparks come off my heels when I'm running out the door. It's not because you all are not hospitable or this is not a great panel. It's because the show starts at 8. I produce and host the show. So literally I'm wearing 4 hats, and I was doing some of that over there before I came up to moderate the panel. So please, I apologize in advance. I plan on coming back. But we had Dr. Conti on the show back in August, and one of the things that we must do is not only talk about these issues, but talk about them in a way that moves towards solutions. You know, I was reading the statement before it was read earlier, and it stuck out to me when it was read, but it stuck out to me when I read it earlier this afternoon as well. The very end paragraph that we just heard, it's the sentence that goes, the phrase I should say, our resurrection comes at a cost. But when it comes to this panel, when it comes to what we were talking about with Ferguson and August, and what we have to do as a community, as scholars, and as people that are part of our communities and part of this country, if their resurrection's coming at a cost, are we going to allow them to make some value out of the price that they paid? Because if there's a cost to it that no one's willing to pay for other than them, then it's a waste. We continue this cycle. We continue to have these type of panels when we move forward. So as you think about your questions, and I'm going to challenge the panelists as well, because these are activists, which that root word means they're doing something, they're active. Let's make sure that, as Professor Wideman said earlier, that we're not just talking about the symptoms and the statistics, the things that make media pop, if you will. Let's talk about the solution so we can make society go. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So each one of these gentlemen, Dr. Conti had the opportunity to introduce them. I'm going to go and dive right into the questions. I'm going to go to Dr. Gascu first. I know that Dr. Conti said he hopes that you get to your story, so there's no need to build up any more suspense. If you will share some of that story with us, please.
Absolutely. Things happen for a reason. First time I ever met Jasari X here, and what do you know? We're from the same neighborhood. Born and raised in inner city Chicago.
Whoa. I just came from Chicago. What part of Chicago?
South Side.
What part of the South Side?
Roseland. It's commonly referred to as the Wild 100s.
Wild 100s, which is right down. You go down Stony Island, keep going past Hyde Park, keep going past Chatham, go past West Pullman, you keep going into the... Yeah, those are my peeps. Go ahead.
Born and raised. The Wild 100s gives you character and resilience. It makes life outside of the 100s look very easy. My father, who had been in and out of the criminal justice system himself, told my brothers and I that we had a moral duty to be mitigators within the criminal justice system. So here is my father, someone who's been in and out of the system, encouraging my brothers and I to go into policing. Because he said, as a young black man, inner city Chicago, you're going to meet the criminal justice system. Now, you can either meet the criminal justice system from within or from outside. And with that calling, I spent 20 years as a law enforcement agent, 11 as a major crimes detective assigned to the Department of Justice's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. Towards the end of that, I finished graduate work, my PhD, and the University of Pittsburgh became my home.
I appreciate that story, Doctor. And Jasiri, I'm going to get to you next. I'm going to try to do a little bit of the tie with Chicago as well. My 3 years in Chicago, I did work at Chicago State University. You two are probably familiar with WVON.
Absolutely.
I was a radio show host on WVON. So as you well know, when you're on VON, either you are part of the community or you're not at VON very long.
Yes, sir.
And Chicago is very much like Pittsburgh. I told people all the time that I used to call Pittsburgh Little Chicago. I just said there's a lot more hills and it's a lot smaller, but per capita there's the same amount of potholes, both in Pittsburgh and in Chicago, and they could attest to that. But one of the things, unfortunately, that was very similar, when you look at the criminal justice system, and Jasiri, this is what I'm going to bring to you, the lack of trust between those that are either elected to mitigate issues in our society or those that they appoint from there to deal with communities. There's no trust, by and large, between many communities that are impacted by the criminal justice system and those that are in charge, whether it is the south side of Chicago or here in the city of Pittsburgh. As you reflect upon your youth and you reflect upon what you've seen here in Pittsburgh, can you talk about some of those unfortunate similarities and how we have to go after them to reverse those trends?
Just to start off, I was actually born in a neighborhood in Chicago, which was really 72nd and Eberhart, which is Martin Luther King Drive. We moved to 109th and Indiana and Roseland, and then that's when my mom kind of made the decision, we have to get out of here. That's really how I ended up in Pittsburgh, you know what I'm saying, because of that neighborhood, and I was coming of age, and brother can attest. I mean, it wasn't really a question of whether or not you were going to be a part of what was happening on the street. It just was what it was. And so my mom seeing that, I moved from the south side of Chicago to Monroeville, Pennsylvania, which was a complete culture shock. Because I had never gone to school with any white students until I came to Gateway, which was I won't get into all of that. But just, in Chicago, I mean, you're talking about a city, we talk about policing in Chicago, I mean, you're talking about, a place where you had, I believe his name was Berg.
John Birch.
John Birch, right. He was torturing people. I mean, you had a situation where, predominantly people of color were being arrested and tortured.
And Jasiri, let me emphasize the level of torture. He ended up, it was said under oath, that he was literally taking African-American men, and in order to get them to admit to crimes that they did not commit, putting electrodes on their testicles.
Yeah. So
we're not talking about a little bit of slapping around and beating. And this had gone on for years. And by the way, this man's still getting his pension.
Right. And not in jail. So, I mean, so when you talk about trust, when that happens, and then there's no accountability, you know what I'm saying? He's walking around, and just like you said, he's collecting his pension, he's fine. I mean, here in Pittsburgh, I mean, we've had cases over and over again of police brutality where, the officers that commit these crimes are not, they're not charged with anything, they're not dismissed from the force. I mean, they're right back to policing, those, I mean, think about it. I mean, the officers that beat Jordan Miles, who's an honor student. He played the viola. I mean, he was walking to his grandmother's house, but he made the mistake of running from these officers, not knowing that these were the jump out boys because he's somebody that's not involved in the street. And then when they catch him, they beat him to a point where his own mother didn't recognize him. And it's not, I always say, like, I wouldn't want to be a police officer. I'm sure it's a high-stress job. And if I can make a mistake in my little job, or if you're a team, every person in a job makes mistakes. But what happens when the police make a mistake, they don't come out and say, you know what, we made a mistake. It was the wrong person. What can we do to make amends with the community? What can we do to help alleviate this situation? No, they come out and say we did what we were trained to do. Our officers were right to do that. They lie on the stand and say the neighbor called the cops. She gets on the stand and say she didn't call the cops. And, those cops aren't dealt with. And then the justice system tells us, oh, yeah, he was wrongly arrested, but that wasn't abuse. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, you had then, a couple months later, you have a case of Leon Ford where he stopped, he gives him his driver's license, he gives him his registration. He's identified himself. The car comes back to him. But then the police, because he's a young African-American man, want to try to make him a criminal. And then, want to try to pull him out of a car. He gets shot 5 times. He's paralyzed and he's on trial. And you know what I mean? And it's like, even though he's found guilty of the most serious charges, like the DA is still considering, like the man is paralyzed. And so at that point, and I'll end with this. When we first started One Hood and was really doing things in the community and advocating for our community, the police asked us to, they said, we want to meet with you all, One Hood. Can you come down to the police headquarters? We said, sure. We came down and they said, we would like you all to help us help the community cooperate with the police more. We said, what we want you to do is to compel officers to cooperate more in cases of police brutality. We would like officers to testify before the Civilian Police Review Board, and we would like officers to turn in other officers that break the law and brutalize our community. They said, we can't do that. We said, well, we can't help you. I mean, it can't be a one-way street, and that's the problem. It's like you come to our community and tell us that you want us to turn over our bad apples, but you never do that. You know, you tell us that we shouldn't talk about stop snitching, but you have the blue wall of silence, and if anybody breaks that wall, they're ostracized from the police department. So it's the hypocrisy that is really what causes it, and that inability to have a real, open, transparent relationship. Anybody, you know, if you're in a relationship with somebody and they don't have transparency and, you know, it's a one-way street, that's a relationship that's unhealthy, and you want to get out of that.
Siri, I think you bring up a good point, and Professor Wideman, I'm going to get to you on this in a second. I think one of the things that oftentimes is overlooked is the fact that there's an expectation for community members when dealing with the criminal justice system to elevate their game, but there's also a built-in expectation that those within the community that go through these experiences are not seen as being American citizens. And when you do not have your citizenship respected, then there is the inherent belief that you can jump out of some bushes, chase down a teenage kid and beat him to a pulp, and you're going to get off. Or you're going to pull over a kid. He's going to have all of his information, by the way, state-issued information, check out okay, but he's still in the wrong because you shot him 5 times. Professor Wideman, this goes to the issue of race in the criminal justice system. And another set of examples that a lot of people bring up when it comes to how police deal with some American citizens versus other American citizens. How can you have an individual jump over a fence at the White House, run across the lawn, run into the White House, and as one of my current colleagues likes to say, sit down in the East Room and order pizza? You have an individual that walked into a police station armed with a semi-automatic weapon in Oregon and be tackled and taken to the ground. They have their day in court. Jordan Miles didn't necessarily have to live. Leon Ford certainly didn't have to live, and Johnny Gamage didn't live. So when you start talking about the role of race when it comes to interacting with the criminal justice system, how do we further highlight it so that things can change?
We stop pretending. We stop pretending. There is no misconception here. There is no exceptionalism. You say the word Chicago, and you talk about police brutality, and everybody can kind of punch up on their phone recent cases. If you read Richard Wright, a famous African-American writer who wrote a book called Native Son. Black Boy was also a book of his. But central to almost all the stories that Richard Wright passed on and became not only American literature but world literature is police brutality. We're not talking about some weird edge of evil that plagues our justice system. Our justice system works on the principle that justice is only possible if certain people are kept under wraps. Justice is a matter of dealing with surplus people who get in the way of a functioning of America the way that it has always functioned. That is, as an enterprise for the rich and the racially privileged. So we're not talking about anything new, anything different. If your eyes are open, if you read, if you study, if you think, the premise of our so-called democracy is that the law and the justice system will keep the surplus people, the unnecessary people, out of the way. Now, how that's done is what the anecdotes are about. But they're just anecdotes. They're the latest. Ferguson. Well, okay. But I've seen Ferguson in countless communities. And even before the headlines settled, there's another story. Absolutely. So let's stop kidding ourselves. We have an endemic, basic problem. We have one way of handling it. The way we handle it gives us the statistics we have, make the victims that we have the victims. And now what to do about this? What about the word genocide? That's a ranting word, right? That's something people say who are a little bent. What do you mean, genocide? But I am a witness to genocide. A certain group of people have been designated as surplus, and they are an endangered species, and they're getting taken out. And that's a fact.
So, Professor, let me bounce this over to Dr. Tony then. I know that Dr. Conti and I, when we were on the show in August, we talked about, okay, where do you start with this? Because a lot of times when they come to us, Dr. Tony, they're talking about, okay, well, we got to fix it at the community, and if we have more fathers in the homes, and if people would just go get a job. We hear a lot about that, but based on what the professor's saying here, Professor Wideman, it looks as though this is not just problematic because there are no jobs in the community or the school systems in certain neighborhoods are bad. It seems as though this also starts from the policy making. So talk to us a little bit about how we change this dynamic between race and the criminal justice system by going in a multi-tiered fashion, whether it's going after the policy makers and the policies in place, as well as the education and the economic components that breed this situation.
Wow. Well, first of all, when Dr. Conti asked me to sit on this panel, I only agreed to do so if I was allowed to speak truths. And so I'm going to speak some truths. America has never gotten over its original sin of the genocide of Native and African Americans. That's the foundation. The criminal justice system is a component that was born from those seeds. And you know, I attended a couple of nights ago a community meeting between the new police chief here in Pittsburgh, and he had a panel. And one of the questions that was asked by the audience was, could there be an issue of racism within the Bureau of Police in Pittsburgh? And the entire panel, which included an African-American retired police officer, no one wanted to say yes. They looked at each other and they said, you know, it's a training. We have to train officers. And we need to hire and recruit different officers. James Baldwin said it the best. And just paraphrasing, it is not the crime that hurts. It's the lack of acknowledging the crime that causes the systemic pain. Now, yesterday, when we talk about policy and moving forward, you know, I spent 7 years inside federal prisons as a volunteer, teaching incarcerated students. And yesterday I was invited to visit the local jail and to see a post-secondary prison education program. I was probably the angriest black male there because this is what I saw. The staff was smiling. The incarcerated students were happier to be there. Young black men happy to be incarcerated, smiling like it was daycare. See, those are the truths. We have a system that is oppressive, and 3, 4, 5 generations have created sub-oppressors where we begin to enjoy this process, this $1.2 trillion a year business. There are 3 forms of culpability in this. Those that commit crimes, those that enforce criminal laws, and the overwhelming majority that stand by and do absolutely nothing when they see it. I am a subject matter expert in criminal justice, so I apologize ahead if this is incorrect. I believe it was in the New Testament, Luke, that said that it is our moral duty to provide good news to the suffering and poor, as well as to free the oppressed. It is our moral duty. The only thing that I could think about when I saw those young men in that setting, in their happy state, was, this is not planned. Jasiriak's album Ascension, 21 Forever. That these guys believe that they're going to live forever in this bubble that they've created for themselves, this safe haven. You have to get out there and put your feet on the pavement and not just march, not just be, to tweet and to hashtag activism. If you are a black American, don't teach your children to run from the police. The criminal justice system is a great white shark. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, it swims and it eats, it arrests. Public service is not in the mantra. And if you want to train a shark, I spent most of my life in law enforcement in Florida. And I have gone to watch Shamu balance the trainers in the water, and he jumps through hoops and there's fire and clapping. I want you to imagine putting a shark in that pool. The DNA of the shark is to eat. If you want the criminal justice system to do more than to arrest, you're on another planet. Listen, that's a fact. If you are black, if you are Latino, if you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, gay, lesbian, straight, become criminal justice professionals from the inside. I tell criminal justice students at the University of Pittsburgh, I'm not looking for the next state police officer or DEA agent. I'm looking for the next chief of the Pittsburgh Police Department. So you have to take that first step. Trust. The criminal justice system does not deserve our trust today. They don't deserve it. So you have to be part of that change as well. You just can't sit and talk about it. You have to be about it. You have to do it.
Professor Wideman, with that said, when you start thinking about think tanks and the type of solutions, activism, things along those lines that they're putting out when they're looking at the new Jim Crow, as Melissa Alexander said in her book, what's the role of them looking at everything as well? For example, not just speaking up for the humanity of those incarcerated, which we heard about earlier, but as they're doing that, talking about, and their kids need to be able to have jobs. And by the way, their grandkids need to make sure that they're registered to vote. And by the way, we need to make sure that their cousins are going to good schools. How does that play into something that the think tanks that Dr. Conti and other activists here are involved with? Because it seems as though if you're not resolving all of that at the same time, we're making baby steps in a long journey that needs to be taken by all of us.
Teaching moment. I would love to start with a presidential teaching moment in which we are taught about the obsolescence of the notion of race and how it destroys us all, whatever color you happen to be. I would want to see something at that sort of level that just began to open up the depth of the problem with a real intention not to grandstand, not to bring out a whole lot of gruesome statistics, but to give us some sort of just understandable reading of where we actually are. Not where somebody else wants to take us, or not where we're inevitably going to go if we don't change but where are we? We're still using a concept of race across the board, in statistics, in schools, as we think about one another, a concept that is absolutely debased, irrational, based on superstition, reinforced by violence, and that's where we are. Now, if the president wants to do a teaching moment, or Attorney General Holder, or Mrs. Clinton, someone has to stand up and take a reading of the temperature. Baldwin said, who wants to be part of a building, who wants to integrate a building that's on fire? Well, it's burning, people. It is on fire. And who is taking the temperature and bringing that news to the rest of us? It has to start there, not piecemeal. And then it's on you and me. If you know that you are in a country that is systematically destroying a good portion of its citizenry for no better reason, well, I won't even say there is a reason, except it's happened always and it continues to happen now. So what do you want to do about that? Do you go join the armed forces of that country? Do you go to work the next day? Do you give your wife a Mother's Day card? What do you do if you're in a country that is in that kind of terminal self-destruction? Maybe something should stop. Maybe we have to each take account of that. And how do you get a hand on it? I think by an intelligent perception of the very basic concept, race. And that's not, I mean, I'm hoping that's not a generalized answer. It's a very specific answer. It's somebody has to tell the truth, and it has to be graspable in a way that then each person can take some action.
I'm going to put aside my follow-up question to that, because I have one. I'm going to get to Jasiri in just a second. Matter of fact, right now I'm going to go to Jasiri, and I'm going to try to come back to that follow-up question. Jasiri, as I was sitting here listening to Professor Wideman, I was thinking about the role of think tanks in regards to the criminal justice system, and where is that line today between being reactionary, dealing with the brothers and sisters, by the way. We oftentimes think that this is just a male problem.
Right.
Go look at the statistics. Hate to go to statistics, but female incarceration is going in the absolute wrong direction. So where's that line between being reactionary and helping to heal the brothers and sisters that are now finding their ways into our jails, and being proactive to turn the trend? Because oftentimes we seem to, and maybe in some instances, most think tanks around the country, we're trying to deal with what's already on the inside without having the resources. Sometimes it's resources, time, money, people, and sometimes it's just a lack of focus. But where's that line today? What should be that teetering point between being reactionary and being proactive when it comes to this?
I don't think there is a line. I would argue that you have to do both. You know, you got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You know, and and I'll kind of, when I went to Ferguson, and when I saw the organizing that was being done in Ferguson, primarily by, young black and brown men and women, particularly black, the level of sophistication of their organizing amazed me, because they were literally doing both. They would be organizing during the day, and they were meeting at this church. They had an orientation meeting for all these new people that were coming into Ferguson every day. They had a core meeting, and then an outside core meeting, and then a meeting of people outside of that. They had a media team, and a team that was dealing with the mobilization, and a team that was dealing with the strategy and next steps. But then at nighttime, they would have to then go out. Because at nighttime is when oftentimes the clashes with the heavy militarized, I won't even call it a police. It was really an army. I mean, you saw fatigues, you saw M16s, you saw tanks, you saw a LRAD, which is a sound cannon. Tear gas was being used. That's illegal in war. That's considered a chemical warfare. And when nighttime came, the adults would leave. And so it was really the young people and the street organizations, the gangs that came together and unified, that had to face this battle. So they literally had to kind of almost literally go to war at nighttime, and then in the daytime, organize and strategize for what's next. So you see kind of like the Ferguson October and all these things that have come out of it. So I literally was amazed. And I just had to say, do you all realize how the level of operation? One of the guys who was in leadership, he had just got back because they had jailed him 3 days for nothing. These are people that left their jobs and got on the ball. So I think that we can't, of course we need to strategize, we need to organize, and we need to plan. But at this point in time, we got to do both. We got to do more than just, read and be at the college and be at the university and think like that's my contribution. No, it's a state of emergency right now. Too many of us are dying. Too many of us are going to prison. More is expected of us. And I put that on myself. I can't just be a conscious rapper. I can't just say, well, hey, I gave you a rap and it's going to be conscious. No, I have to be actively involved in the community where I am, which is why, we founded One Hood. We founded the One Hood Media Academy. We got to do both now.
So you must be reading my mind. I won't say great minds think alike. I'll give you the credit for being a great mind, to be determined over here. But I'm going to send it over to Dr. Gaskew first, and then I'm going to move down the table with this. And it's something I've said on the radio, something I've put in print. If we got all these things going on, particularly with the way certain communities in America are treated by the police, how their rights as citizens are violated, and then you look at all the socioeconomic disparities that are going on, how come something hasn't shut down yet? Jasiri just talks about you have to do something. We're talking about activism, being active and doing things. Disney World didn't shut down after Trayvon Martin. People are still drinking Anheuser-Busch. I don't drink beer, but there's a lot of people of black and brown communities drinking Anheuser-Busch coming right out of St. Louis. When's the point when something shuts down? If we're at the point that we say we're at, or is that no longer an option in 2014 where it worked in the 50s and 60s and maybe it's not what we should be doing anymore?
Tough question, tough answer.
Are we afraid to shut stuff down now?
We're at a point, and again, we, and I do mean we depend on the money that the criminal justice system generates. We need it. It's over 10% of our GNP. So we're a country that has the criminal justice system's IV in our arms. No one is going to pull that plug because, if you're a nurse and you work in a hospital and they're building them, why do you think that hospital is being built? To handle gunshot victims.
But here's my pushback. you can say that the IV was in our arms with segregation as well. And there would be nobody that would rip out the slow drip of segregation when you had black hospitals, black businesses, black Wall Street. There were jobs that were lost, but the greater good was integration to break through some of those mores. And so you saw people that literally didn't ride buses for months at a time, that shut down parts of cities, that went through horrific crimes, some of were killed. And they had the bravery at 16, 17, college age, 50 years ago. And now I have heard arguments from folks as young as 20 and as old as 75 telling me why we can't do that anymore. And I'll just be honest with you, it frustrates won't say it, but it frustrates me greatly. So if our activism at this point in time doesn't do enough and America responds to economic stimulus, then is that something that should be on the table in 2014 if we continue to go through these situations?
There is nothing that should be taken off the table. Absolutely. But that takes a collective effort. And, you made an outstanding point. To make an economic impact, it takes courage. Courage. I don't want to say that we've become complacent.
You can say it, I would.
Okay?
Because it's the truth.
We've just learned to accept, to take it, to not fight back. My dad was raised in Jim Crow. I spent 6 years of my life in the 60s, where activism was part of your DNA. I don't know whether it was poisoned out of us through alcohol and drugs and fast money and middle class spoilings, but nobody today wants to put it on the line and say, listen, we need to, I have a gentleman sitting next to me that could make much more money if he decided to, have some wiggling behinds in his videos. Yeah. Or if he decided to talk about the glamour of this pseudo life. Yeah. Collectively, we have to begin to have courage. Courage to say, we're not going to spend our money where we think it is not going to benefit social justice. Yeah. It's tough to do.
Professor Wideman.
Can I answer that? Because there are some clear examples. And one, not to scare anybody, but I have a song called Do We Need to Start a Riot? And I asked that question, I raised that question after the Malcolm X grassroots movement did a report that said a black person was killed every 28 hours by a police officer, a security guard, or somebody like George Zimmerman. And it was also the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion in 1992. So we just did an event last Friday called Could Pittsburgh Be the Next Ferguson? And of course, by asking that question, a lot of people were very afraid. They wanted to send more cops to our event. But one of the, we said, no, it was peaceful. You would have heard about it on the news if it wasn't. So one of the people that was there was Oscar Grant's uncle, Bobby. So one of the things that happened, when Oscar Grant was murdered, and if you haven't seen the movie Fruitvale Station, I would ask you to go see it, and it was on videotape and the police didn't respond. One of the things that happened was there was a rebellion in Oakland, and they went downtown and they tore some stuff up. But after that, when the Oscar Grant Committee began to organizing, they went to the Longshoremen's Union. The Longshoremen's Union actually shut down the port. And for Oscar Grant, which cost millions of dollars. It got to the point where because of the activism they were doing, it was just more, they let the officer go. It was the first officer that was indicted in the history of California. After Trayvon Martin's or George Zimmerman was found not guilty, an organization called the Dream Defenders occupied the State House of Florida for 31 days. They were harassed and they were, denied food and sometimes different things, but they occupied it for 31 days. An example, just recently, there was a group of Ohio students that occupied the Beaver Creek Police Department for 3 days in response to the killing of John Crawford, who had a toy rifle at Walmart and was murdered by police officers. So there are people right now. So I just a lot of times we don't see it. I mean, I watched the live stream of what went down in St. Louis, and I don't know if you saw. And I was saying to them, and I hope you don't. The chant wasn't "We shall overcome." I mean, they were in these police officers' faces. And the chant was, and if you don't appreciate strong language, I don't know if any children in here, the chant was "fuck the police. Without a badge, you're a bitch and a half." This is what they were. They were in these police officers' faces. They made the police leave. So I feel like we're there. Like that shutdown point, we're right there, you know what I'm saying? And really, as these incidents become more and more heightened, because of social media, we're able to see these incidents and kind of connect the dots. More people are becoming politicized, more people are getting involved, and believe me, more people are taking those risks because there were risks being taken. People are being, in fact, if you want to come to Ferguson on Monday is going to be a day of civil disobedience in Ferguson, and they would like to see at least 1,000 people get arrested in an act of civil disobedience in Ferguson to get justice for Michael Brown. And so we're at that point now. People are taking those risks. People are becoming courageous, and I just want to big those people up. And oftentimes, you're not going to see it on CNN, but that's why we have Twitter and Facebook now. We don't need you, CNN. We get the information out ourselves.
But Jasiri, I'm going to push back on that and take it to Professor Wideman before we get to questions, because I know we're getting to the end of the panel. Oftentimes, no offense, we're talking real, right? Right, Doctor? Okay.
We have to.
Okay. Oftentimes, those are poor people doing that.
Yes, sir. True.
And as long as poor people go to jail and poor people are involved in civil disobedience, or 21-year-olds that are still in college or getting a doctorate or something along those lines, it's nice, it makes a good story, and then it goes away.
Flip on the radar.
When, Professor, do we go towards the think tanks, go towards the thought leaders, and say, as you're organizing around criminal justice, as you're organizing around those that we're trying to rehabilitate in the jail so they could still have a full and productive life as men, as women, and as citizens, when do we take that and combine it with communities that have affluence and economic influence to bring about substantive change, not just temporary awareness?
Any social revolution in the history of the world, which has brought about major change in a government, does not begin by passing out roles. You talk, you die, you be the intellectual, you be the... It starts with people on the line. They have started with people as soldiers. Now, depending on the social movement and the time and the country you're talking about, being a soldier didn't always mean shooting. It didn't mean having a weapon, but it meant that there was a community of a collective community in which everyone was pushing in the same direction, at least for a while. There was a kind of leveling, a breaking down of categories. Because if you think about it, however we think of ourselves, that is an inheritance from the very social structure that we want to strike out against. I have a name, John Wideman. And if I want to sign up for something, I got to use that name. Already I'm compromised in a strange kind of way. I'm speaking a certain kind of language. I'm already conceding my identity is being nurtured by this society I'm going. So what I'm just listening to my younger brother here and saying that people have to be soldiers. And the army can't be a black army or a Chicano army or women's army. It has to be an army. And it has to be capacious enough, and the goal has to be direct enough that everyone who joins the army can feel, and army's the wrong word, Everybody who joins the community can become part of the weight, and that's what the seismic force. You got a rocket at the base, and the base is as large as you can make it, as many people as you can make it, as many and articulate it. But I feel almost now, and this is personal, forgive me, it's too late for me. Any advice I give should be taken with a grain of salt. I wanted things to change. I tried. My peers tried. We didn't do it. We changed some things. And many of us also have had very good lives and much better lives than our parents' lives. But the ones who have most at stake right now are the very young people. And if it's going to be a different world, it's going to be because you have put your asses on the line. And you have made a community that makes sense to you and makes sense to the person standing next to you. Not because Wideman said something or because Obama even said something, but because you have something at stake and you're willing to risk it, whatever it is, because it ain't right.
Let me take a couple questions before we get out of here. Go ahead, sir, please.
Well, does this mean, first of all, you've had Occupy Wall Street, right? Political. Does this mean we need a new Black Panther? That was in the community. They, obviously, we know that it was corrupt. How do you keep an army from being corrupt? But they served the community and to some degree protected the community. Is that what we need? Is that what you're talking about? When you talk about revolution, when you talk about pushing back, when you talk about doing something in the community that says, we're not going to take it anymore, and we're going to take care of ourselves. Is that what we need?
I definitely think that there are lessons that we have learned and have taken from the Black Panther Party, as well as other revolutionary groups. When you mentioned thought leaders, I was sent to Ferguson by I consider a thought leader, elder, activist named Harry Belafonte, who saw what was happening and immediately began to get involved. And of course, him being 87, he couldn't physically go, but he sent us, and it's sending me again this weekend, as well as and so we had a strategy meeting before we left with Mr. Belafonte, with Cornel West, and others. So I definitely think that. Like I said, there's, one of the things we did at One Hood, one of the first things we did when it was a shooting in Homewood, it was 6 shootings in a 21-hour period. We took a group of 30 to 40 men and just walked the streets at night and began to walk our own communities. So I definitely think there's an aspect of watching our communities. These things called cop watches are becoming very popular. There was a group that fundraised to have citizens in Ferguson actually wear cameras on themselves. Of course, they say the cops are supposed to be wearing cameras in Ferguson, but a police officer was just shot. His camera was off. But the community are wearing cameras now. And so these definitely tools, we are utilizing these tools. We are utilizing these lessons. But absolutely, we need to definitely patrol our own communities, patrol the cops. And, I would never, if we're, for us to try to look to an oppressor for help to get us out of our own oppression would be insane. So obviously, clearly, we have to begin to do it ourselves.
Did you have a question, ma'am?
Well, I do have a question, and I think it speaks to what you just said and something that Professor Wideman said earlier. So I've been really moved and impacted by what you all have said, and I'm thinking about what Professor Wideman said earlier about, I'm not sure I'm going to get your words right, but this isn't about me, but it is about being. Is that what you're
Something
saying?
like that, yeah.
Right. So, as a white woman who's been hearing about this work since 1991 and involved in it in different ways, I have often struggled with the thought of, this isn't about me. Why do I have the right to be involved in this? I shouldn't be doing this. it's presumptuous of me to be involved in some way, right? Why am I so privileged to care about this when it's other people who are suffering? And so I think that in a way gets to what you just said, that you can't expect your oppressor to rescue you. And so coming at this from an inside-out perspective, which is about coalition building and which is about building relationships in unexpected places and creating unexpected communities, I guess my question would be, where can we get the people besides young people, and particularly young people of color, to be arrested? Like, where can we find a community of people who would be willing to do that? I think about myself, I theoretically be willing to do that, but I have kids that I'm raising right now. I can't do that right now. But maybe older people could. Maybe, you know.
Yeah, there was a 91-year-old. There was a 91-year-old. I believe she was a Holocaust survivor, Jewish woman that was arrested in Ferguson in protest of what was happening.
So my suggestion would be like maybe we all can think about maybe reaching out to some of those communities of different age groups and different races and different backgrounds who, being retired perhaps, might have the resources or the time and the willingness.
If I may, though, and no offense to you personally, I promise you, but it kind of also goes back to what Professor Wideman said as well, which is at some point in time, people got to put their behinds. He's an elder. He's allowed to use the other word. You got to be able to put your behinds on the line. You got to be willing to go through some things because there is no change where there is safety, especially when you're talking about society. And if you're talking about growth, you're never going to be able to grow to any place that's fulfilling if you are comfortable with your lack of fulfillment. And that is something too often than not that we as Americans, and I will not just hold this with Black America, I will say all of us as Americans, we stay within. We know we're obese, but we will stay comfortable in our obesity and we'll go lose a couple pounds and not have a couple of chips and still stay 40 pounds overweight and then complain about the holidays as if that's the only time we overate. At some point in time, we're going to need elected officials, we're going to need religious leaders, we're going to need community leaders, we're going to need scholars, and we're going to need activists to all come together and say, we are going to create something better. I don't know what the sacrifice is going to be, but I'm committing to that sacrifice in order to make something better. And that's where people come into play, and they may say, you can't do it because you're raising kids, but I can. Or, you know, I know, for example, the stances that I take, I sit in a very, and Dr. Conti can vouch for this, I sit in a very unique media and political, you know, situation. I'm basically a committee of one in so many different ways. But I understand that I really don't have any other recourse or obligation other than to speak up from that because I am a committee of one. And each one of us have that unique quality that we have to make sure we bring into the table. 2 more questions real quick. I'm going to get to you, but I'm going to go ladies first because that's just how I was raised. So go ahead.
Well, mine is kind of like a two-part question. It's 2 different issues, but I was speaking with a friend of mine, and his stance is that if we cooperate with the police more, then maybe these things won't happen. Like, I don't want to use this as an example, but if Leon Ford had just got out of his car, then he wouldn't have gotten shot. And I'm just wondering, what is your stance as far as us cooperating more? Do you think these instances would happen less if we were to cooperate more?
Johnny Ford got out of his car.
Do you want to take that?
That's probably before your time, but Johnny Ford got out of his car. So, you know.
Look, you know, just to reiterate, every police contact is a potential arrest. Let me say that again. Every time that a police officer needs to speak to you, there's a computer chip in the back of their head that says, how am I going to get into that person's pockets to make an arrest? But in this relationship, it is a dance. Police are looking for a reaction. Any reaction that will allow them to get into your pockets and to make a search. Now, there is accountability, and I don't know if we've used that word enough today. There is accountability. Black men commit crimes, and some would do so without any police intervention. In my career, I have never seen a black male who shot another black male, and we all know crime is intraracial. Whites kill whites, blacks kill blacks. I've never seen a black male kill another black male and got that gun from a white police officer, shoot that black male. I've never seen a black male who sold drugs say, hey, you know what? A white police officer gave me those drugs to sell in my black community. It is a dance. Every person should know their civil rights. They should know that the only way that the police can make contact with you is either consent, reasonable suspicion, or probable cause to arrest. And if it's consent, you walk away. If it's reasonable suspicion, it's a 20-minute temporary detention where an officer can say, I have 20 minutes to figure out how I'm going to put you in handcuffs. There is no straight answer. You want to be respectful, but cooperative. You want to be cooperative as much as your rights will allow you to. That is your Fourth Amendment rights.
And if I could, I mean, just recently, I don't know if you saw what happened in South Carolina. Police pulled over a man who, because he didn't have a seatbelt on, police officer gets out the car. He says, get your license. The guy goes to get his license, and the police officer just opened up and started shooting him. The guy was like, what did I do? You told me to go get my license. And so just some facts, you know, as people of color use the drugs the same amount as white people. We're arrested 4 times as much. Washington Post just did an article that actually said white people sell drugs at a higher rate, a higher percentage than black people. But we fill the jails. So if if it was just about cooperation, then the killing would be all along the lines, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, it's clearly what are we saying, like white people always cooperate? Other communities always cooperate? No. So obviously it goes back to what Professor Wideman said. It goes back to race. And if we're unwilling to acknowledge that, if we're unwilling to recognize that we operate on a system of white supremacy, then everything else becomes like a huge hard, like you don't understand, you know, because you miss the basic structure on which everything goes. And if we're unable to confront that with a think tank, in a scholarly, academic, studious way, then we're going to continue to lose, and we're going to continue to be having these conversations over and over again. And then, you know, I did a song after Ferguson where I said, dead kids can't beg your forgiveness. And it'll be continually another dead child, and it's always their fault. And it's always the victim's fault, you know?
A rap song is a think tank. Someone raising the issue with you that the reason these guys are getting shot is because they're not cooperating, or if they cooperated more, they wouldn't get shot. That's a think tank, because you should be able to put the logic of what that person is saying together and understand that they have put the onus or the weight on the person of color and have forgotten the fact, well, maybe this cop wanted to do this, or maybe this cop would have done this if the black colored potential perpetrator had got up and sang the cop anthem, or the American Declaration of Independence, and just began to go down on his knees and eat a piece of watermelon. He still would have gotten shot. So that's a think tank. And think tanks have their places. History is very important. Some of us, the history of a life, that's a think tank. Your great-grandmother is a think tank because she's a rational person. She's had real experiences. And you don't have to read a paper to benefit from that. You don't have to read an academic or scholarly paper. Your mind is a think tank. To what degree are you willing to subject it to the discipline of mathematics or language to make that think tank acute? One thing I'd like to say, and I would not be, now when the specter of the Black Panthers or the hope of the Black Panthers comes up, mass revolutions end badly. No matter how well they start, they end badly because they make the same mistake that the oppressor makes. That is, people get lumped and make the mistake that that things are going to change. It's a war. That's in the think tank of thinking about revolution. It's war. You get one side, the other side, kill enough of them, we'll win. They kill enough of us, they'll win. And that's where the individual gets lost. Your life is precious. You have to understand that. And you have to have the willingness to put that on the line if you choose to. But you also have to always remember that it never goes any further than that. If you make the right decision in a given moment, according to the best of your think tank, that's as much as you're ever going to be able to do in the world. You're not going to change the larger picture. No one can. But you have to be right with yourself. That's where revolution begins and ends, on that individual level. Then there's a question of organizing, there's a question of figuring out your enemy, there's a question of strategy, there's a question of building up communities. But all that is not going to change the world. You will be left at the end of the Black Panther Revolution or Mao's Revolution or the French Revolution. You're going to be left with moral and ethical decisions which will ask you to questions about your own seriousness and selfishness, and you have to be able to answer those. That's where the revolution will really take place, when you can feel some sort of confidence in your ability to sort out the issues and cut away that selfishness which seems to be so necessary to survive. Go
ahead, finish your thought, Professor.
It's not necessary to be selfish to survive. And survival is not survival of selfishness.
Let me get to one more question. Brother, go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I got a chance to go to the forum that Brother Jasiri X was talking about last week. And I remember going home to my wife and telling her that when I looked in the eyes of Tef Poe, they have crossed the line now where there's so much pain that is being felt that they are ready to die. That's where it is. They are ready to die. And the unfortunate piece about all of this, when I look at my students that I teach every day, they don't have the historical context to what Dr. Wideman is talking about. So part of, when I think about our responsibility, just as we have those who are going to put their bodies and their lives on the line, and absolutely that's part of what we have to do. Any movement of change is that's part of the business. But there's also responsibility of us as professors who are sitting at these meetings, who are hosting these classes, and we sit and we say nothing about race. We say nothing about history. But we know we have a mess on the table. We know that there has been a proliferation of narratives about black masculinity, of us being seen as the brute or the buck or the menace or the aggressor throughout 300-400 years, promoted in the academy, promoted in the government, promoted in textbooks, promoted in magazines, promoted in newspapers. have to tell our students the truth. And that there's Columbus Day that's getting ready to be celebrated on Monday. I'm happy Duquesne does it. We have to begin to tell the significance of Columbus as this man started the transatlantic global slave trade. How do I feel as an African-American man that that's who we are celebrating? Of the raping and the slaughtering and the killing of Native Americans and Africans. So I'm not going to go on a diatribe here, but my point is when we begin to ask ourselves questions, blacks as well as whites, and I call all of us our brothers and sisters, we are a family, right? And if we say we respect the humanity of all of us, when do we begin to develop a political education in which we tell our students a truth to which they enter and they know nothing about? And what disservice are we doing when we are willfully silent? Then we're in part responsible for the demise of what we see is to come. So that's just my...
And I think that's an appropriate place to stop because we've touched a little bit of everything. I appreciate your contributions. Appreciate you all being there. Give these gentlemen a round of applause, please.
All right, so a lot of you heard my story before about Jim, who's in who I met in Graterford. Tyrone was working with him back then. He was a juvenile lifer from the north side of Pittsburgh doing life for something he did as a child, basically. And he said, "I'm so happy that you came here because I'm hoping to get transferred closer to home someday and get involved in some activism." And I said, what excuse do I have?
Good luck down
I was ashamed and inspired. I want every one of you to leave here ashamed and inspired, whether you're black, white, man, woman. It doesn't have to be the criminal justice system. There's all kind of problems. But that's what we're in sociology trying to do. I want to thank my inside-out brother, right? Thank my fellow criminal justice expert. Thank the teller of truth. Listen to me, he says. And I do. I want to thank Tony Gaskew. I want to thank Jaziri X. Jaziri, we need you. Jaziri, we need you on this campus. All three of you, this is a campus, and I think some of you will agree, that is drowning in white privilege. It's not a good thing. Work with us. Use what that white privilege has to offer. Right there. All right. Thank you. John Edgar Wideman, my inside-out think tank brother's brother, my brother once removed. This is the culmination of my time as the Gaultier Service Learning, Community-Based Learning Fellow, but it's just the beginning. This is a chance to shame and inspire everyone here to go out and, like we say it used to say at Duquesne, go out and do more. Right? What can you do? But before we close out, I'd just like to say Craze, Oscar, Sean, Malachi, Fly, Khalifa, and Farouk couldn't be here tonight because they're in prison. They're some of the best people I know. I want to thank again Lena Distilio, who is out in the hallway with her son. She is doing all this. I couldn't find the room without her, and she's carrying her son around. I want to thank these gentlemen. I want to thank Melissa, who flew here on a red-eye from Seattle and slept in 3 seats and hung out at my house and learned about SeaWorld from my wife. I want to thank my friend Sarah Allred from Georgia, who really kind of kicked all this stuff off with me. I want to thank Tyrone, my inside-out father, more than a brother. I want to thank, No, I could have said grandfather, but I said father. I want to thank, so if you're a young person, if you're a person trying to make a difference, if you're from Homewood, if you're trying to give people different opportunities, keep doing it. Thank you very much.